Order. Welcome to this meeting of the Culture, Media and Sports Select Committee. Before I begin, I need to remind members to declare any interest before they ask their questions. But here we are, 12 months ago, almost to the day, our predecessor committee published its report on grassroots music venues. It found that UK was losing venues at the rate of 2 a week, and that the number of UK artists on tour had fallen by 3/4 compared to pre-pandemic figures. So our conclusions were unequivocal. These sectors must not be allowed to continue to decline. The current support they are getting is insufficient to prevent it. When the government responded to our report, we said that we would get the band back together, so to speak, if the sector hadn't agreed to get money, a way to get money back into the grassroots, and we hadn't seen any kind of meaningful progress within the 6 months. But as you know, venues are still closing, gigging opportunities are still being lost. Hopefully by the end of today, we can get everybody singing from the same song sheet. Sorry, okay, I'm going to stop doing that now. So first of all, we're hearing from Marit Burning, Marit is the founder of Globetown Records and board director at the Music Managers Forum. From Mark David, the CEO of the Music Venues Trust. From David Martin, the CEO of the Featured Artists Coalition. And from Joff Oddie, who is the co-founder of Fourth Palace and director at the Featured Artists Coalition. You're all very welcome. I'm really grateful for your time this morning, and I'm going to kick off the questions with you, Mark. 2023 was a bad year for grassroots music venues. 2 were closing a week. Last year that slowed down to about 1 every 2 weeks, but it is still obviously really, really worrying. So talk to me about 2025. Is this the year that we're finally going to see an end to the closures?
Unfortunately not, no, Caroline. It's going to be a very, very tough year. There were a number of recommendations in the report that you put out last year that were about what everybody around these venues needed to do. I recognise that today there's going to be a lot of focus on the grassroots levy, but I think it's worth going back to those recommendations and thinking about the other things that haven't been done. I would particularly pick on business rates. The committee recognised that business rates were inequitable in this sector. They were damaging to the sustainability and resilience of grassroots. We've actually increased taxes on grassroots music venues by a total of £7 million. Since April the 4th, with the reduction in business rate relief. Obviously no action was taken on VAT, which is continuing to be the highest it is anywhere in the world on new and emerging music. We're seeing a lot of development going in next to venues. We didn't see particularly increases in the agent of change protections. We've seen a movement in the other direction on statutory consultation. So although I think you will hear today about some progress on the grassroots levy, overall we expect the rate of closures to significantly increase in 2025, not helped by the change in national insurance contributions, which in our particular sector is the way that it's been done. It seems like an unintended consequence because in the gig economy there are a lot of people working for less than £10,000 a year as part of their portfolio careers. And a very large number of those, we reckon around half of the people who had a job in a music venue that wasn't previously subject to NI is now subject to NI. So that's a massive increase in costs. So unfortunately 2025 will undoubtedly probably be worse than 2024 with all those increased costs. It already is. We're now heading back towards 1 a week. So 2023, 1 every 2 weeks. This year, 1 a week. It's very, very tough out there, and I would congratulate the committee on the report last year, which frankly effectively slowed the rate of venue closures because venues finally felt heard and listened to. There was a lot of hope injected into the sector, but hope will not pay the rent, I'm afraid. We actually do need dramatic change.
Thank you, Mark. David, can I move to you? Obviously 1 year on from the previous committee's report, have you seen any progress in implementing the recommendations at all?
I mean, I agree with Mark's points around there being a number of recommendations raised in the report from last year that were very important, but for us the focus since then has been on the levy. You will hear from other witnesses today about the progress that's been made there. The FAC firmly believes that what we have right now is a system of artist-led donations, not a levy. We have artists being burdened with the decision-making around whether shows at the 5,000 capacity and above level should pay into a levy to support the grassroots. Obviously, it's relatively early stages. There was a change of government. last year, which slowed some of the progress down. But right now, as yet, there is around £500,000 committed, potentially, from those larger shows that will go into the Live Trust to be distributed to the grassroots. We're probably still somewhere in the region of 8 to 12 months away from that happening. So ultimately, no, we've not seen any change. Actually, what we've seen, when I came in front of the committee before, I provided evidence of 6 tours at the grassroots level. Only one of those tours had made a very, very moderate amount of money. The rest of them had lost money, all subsidised by artists. The cases that I've pulled since then, we have seen one tour, 7 shows, with the income being around 42% of the cost, with the artist making up that other 58%. The shows got closer to break even through merchandise sales. Another example is a tour of six cities from an artist, all sold out, including a relatively large London show. Despite that, the artist lost £7,000 and funded that shortfall from income from their EP advance. That meant that loss was not then being used to invest in their career elsewhere. So ultimately, no, we're not seeing a huge change. We think it's getting worse. The costs are going up. Inflation is having an impact, and as I said in front of the committee before, the rising costs it bites artists twice. As the biggest employers in the music industry, firstly, it bites them on costs, and it also bites them on demand when it comes to ticket sales. It's having a downward pressure on audiences. And I just think finally on that point, there was a recent survey from music distribution company Ditto of 1,500 independent artists in the UK. 84% of them said they currently could not afford to tour.
David, do you still think that a blanket levy that can support venues, artists and indie promoters, do you still think it can work?
We do. I think we're about 8% of the shows that would qualify, 5,000 capacity and above. About 8% of those shows that have gone on sale since the government responded to the committee's report have implemented a donation. Now the problem, as I think I set out in front of the committee before, but to be very clear, the problem that we have with an artist-led system of donations is twofold. It's unpredictable, and we don't have the right amount. We don't have the maximum amount of money coming in to support the grassroots. But additionally, it places a burden on artists. They're the ones that's name is on the top of a press release which says X artist has donated. Additionally, if they don't donate, they risk being criticised for not paying into the levy. So artists are sort of doomed if they do and doomed if they don't. They're either criticised for potentially increasing ticket prices, or they're criticised for not supporting the grassroots.
Mark, what obstacles do you see are stopping the industry getting to a blanket levy?
I think we should start with the positive. I mean, I would single out AEG. You have Steve Homer as one of your witnesses coming up. Steve, I think, has been really at the forefront of saying, can we do this? I would like to move the conversation on into an exploration. When an arena and stadium show is announced and it doesn't have the levy, I think we should be asking everybody in the supply chain, what didn't happen here so we can get it right the next time. I think at the moment we're still in that phase of, if it happens, who made it happen? Do you know, well, great, it's happened, but I think the question should be reversed. When we see shows that aren't on it, we should be asking the promoter, the ticketing company, the arena itself, the agent, the artist, everybody, not who's responsible, but just what didn't happen here? What didn't function correctly so that we got the grassroots levy that everybody is committed to? I do agree with David. I think there has been some things, but I will say I would pick out AEG. I would particularly pick out SJM, who've done a lot of work on this, and I would pick out Kilimanjaro. Those are 3 promoters who are really making it happen. And I think going through the history of this, it would be disrespectful of me not to praise Enter Shikari, Coldplay, Sam Fender, Katy Perry. You know, there are lots, right the way down to smaller things. Mr. Scruff put a pound levy on his tickets, you know, and he was playing small venues. So it is possible to do it. I do agree with David. There is a risk that artists will be damned if they do, damned if they don't. You know, I do think that's a risk. But I think the point is, the vision was everybody in the supply chain would ask the question, not necessarily be the instigator, but whenever a show's going on, it's the role of everybody in that supply chain to say, what's happening about this pound? Because we've all agreed to it. I don't think anybody disagreed with it. And certainly in the ministerial meeting on the 18th of December, we were unified. Yes, we're all going to make this happen. So I think asking in each case, why did this not happen, is a very reasonable question.
Thank you. Paul?
Thanks very much. It's clear that artists want to tour, or what we're discussing here is whether they feel they can afford to tour. So I'd like to ask you, Joff, first of all, I mean, what's the current state of play for touring artists in the UK? What are the biggest challenges?
I think with, like a lot of industry, in the UK, it's, cost. Cost is a big issue. David got me on here, invited me to speak to you guys today, and I think the big thing that I'd kind of like to communicate to you guys, to get into your heads, is when I was doing the Grassroots, when my band Wolf Alice were doing the Grassroots touring scene 12 years ago, it was unbelievably tight. We would, for years, it was a loss leader, and that's typically how it goes. We would sleep on people's floors when we're outside of London. Most of the people he worked with were kind of doing stuff kind of pro bono, in the kind of hope that if we did start making money, they could commission later on, management agents, things like that, sound men. I put my student loan into funding a tour. 12 years ago, the numbers didn't stack up. Like, they really didn't stack up. And now, it's, unbelievable. I'm sure everyone here can attest to all the kind of things that artists pay for. The enormous list, pre-tour list, rehearsal spaces, manufacturing merchandise, musical tech equipment, making stuff tourable, hire costs, insurance, production costs, travel, van hire, crew costs, session musician fees, fuel, accommodation, per diems, management commission, typically 20% net, agent fee, typically 10% gross, venue merch commissions, accounting fees, storage. It's a huge amount of things that artists have to pay for in order to go out on the road. And we just about made it work. I can honestly say, I'm not sure how Wolf Alice would make it work today.
Right. Marit, has that been your experience as well?
That is very much my experience, yes. Over the last 12 months, I personally oversaw 3 grassroots tours in the UK, as well as a bunch of tour supports with much bigger artists for my roster of emerging artists. And all of those tours, even if they, as what David said, even if they were sold out, none of them turned a profit.
I mean, from the layman's point of view, obviously live experiences, live music has never been more important to the audience, given particularly post-pandemic, when people were shut up in their homes. They really valued the live experience and interaction. And given that artists get peanuts from streaming, live concerts, obviously we assume is a good source of income, but what you're telling us is actually it's almost impossible sometimes for people to get out on the road. So, Marit, can I ask you a bit more about how's the squeeze on venues and the number of venues really affected what you do?
I mean, just yesterday I was on the phone to a live agent we work with who is responsible for booking the venues for our artists. And this is an artist who had just done a pretty decent sized UK tour, hitting the main cities from Glasgow to Manchester and down. This artist is very keen to get out and be in all the smaller towns that you don't automatically hit on that route. And it's been 6 months roughly of conversations trying to get stuff booked in. Phone call yesterday, like, what's going on? My agent said they're all shutting down. Or the staff in these smaller venues, they're either part-time or they're just not, the infrastructure's not there to be putting on smaller tours. So those days of, up and down the country, 90 cap rooms in every town, currently that's not what the situation is. We consolidate and try and hit major cities, and then that means that our fans have to come further. Often many conversations are about, at the merch stand will be fans saying how they've just driven 4 hours to get to the show, and why couldn't we do something a bit nearer? And these are just some of the general complexities that we're facing at the moment when it comes to scheduling.
And sorry, go on, Joff.
Let me just make a point on scheduling as well, because I think it's a really important one. That there are some real risks, I think, to sending young people out on the road on really tight shoestring budgets. And I think we want to remember what happened, the Viola Beach affair. where, you know, a group of young people were out on the road, had to make a journey. You know, they couldn't afford another driver, couldn't afford a hotel, they had to get there. We've all been in that position, you know, people on the road. And I think we do have a duty of care and a kind of moral responsibility to not put young people in that position.
And finally, UK tours are often affected by what used to be European tours. How important is it, given the post-Brexit restrictions that many artists now face, that we actually do get a deal on allowing UK artists to tour in Europe and remove those barriers? Can I ask whoever wants to go for it on that?
I can take that. Very is the answer. It's our nearest neighbour. It's our largest market for touring artists by far, 4 times bigger than the second largest market outside of the UK. Very important is the answer. Very important to the development of new talent, particularly. You know, Wolf Alice will probably get around that. Certainly Elton John will get around the barriers that are faced now. But I think Ed O'Brien, who was on my board at the time from Radiohead, sat in front of this committee when we were talking about streaming, and he said, we used to jump in a van as Radiohead, drive into Europe, drive around and play 11 o'clock slots at festival, 11 a.m. slots at festivals, and that was what made us Radiohead. That's really difficult now. So we've been saying this for a long time. You know, we launched, alongside the MMF, we launched the industry campaign around post-Brexit touring because it's such a critical issue. The fear is you don't see that bite until 5 or 10 years later. And here we are now, surprise, surprise, no UK artists in the top selling albums or singles worldwide, no UK artists in the top streamed Spotify music in the last year, and no UK artists in the top 10 singles listened to in the UK in the last year. That's not happened for decades. So I think we're seeing this biting now. So incredibly important is the answer to that question.
And for the artists as well, obviously, I mean, there wouldn't be a Beatles in Hamburg right now, would there? Given current restrictions, how's it affecting you, the European?
Well, they were
I
deported.
think one of the biggest, you know, one of the huge things we risk is just that music becomes a middle class, upper class sport. Yeah. And we're already seeing, you know, representation at that high level, you know, has gone over the last, 20, 15 years? You know, there's all kinds of statistics saying that's going down, and especially people outside the southeast of England and stuff. So, you know, representation is a hugely important part of this because, you know, it's costly to go on the road and build a career, and to go on the road you need to, to build a career you need to go on the road.
I just think on that point it's really important to note that most of the UK's musical movements that have gone global have come from the working class underground in the last 60 years. So it's essential that there is access to this sector and to this culture.
I think that's why funding artists, you know, as part of this package is really, really, really important.
Thanks.
Thanks. Quick one, James.
Thanks, Chair. Mark, you started with a list. In politics, starting with a list, you always leave people off, and there were definite absentees from that list, including, as I understand it, the biggest global promoter. Who isn't on that list of praise that you issued that should be, do you think?
I genuinely think John from Live, who's your next witness, is probably best placed to answer that, because John has done a great job. John and Steve from Live have done a great job in going around and meeting people. I'm not clear what the obstacles are. I'm much more in the phase of saying, look, actually, here's the people who are getting it right. Here's the people who are leading on it. I think John can probably explain what he sees the obstacles as being, if I'm honest, because he's involved in those discussions.
But your assessment of those deserving of praise included the bands. I mean, I would say the band's fans probably ultimately deserve the praise for paying that premium rather than the millionaires per se. But I'll ask you again, absent from that list were 2 notable brands. I mean, they're owned by one of the bigger 2. Would Live Nation, Ticketmaster being at the party on this make a transformative effect, do you think?
I think everybody being at the party on this would make a transformative effect, and I'm not being evasive. I genuinely think our experience, for example, on the Katy Perry one, let's pick out CAA, one of the world's leading agencies, they very much led on that. So I think the instigation of putting the levy in can come from literally any part of the supply chain. We need everybody to be asking the question, have we done this? So, and normally decisions, one thing I will say, I very much doubt that any ticketing company could be the instigator of this, and that doesn't matter whether it's Ticketmaster or Access or Skiddle. It would be very hard for a ticketing company to tell a promoter or a manager or an agent, by the way, we want to do the pound. That's not the kind of power that ticketing companies have, I'm afraid. So it should be coming. My personal feeling is, based on the industry, I would say promoters can take the lead the most effectively, because they're the ones that understand every part of the tour. They understand what the artist is being paid, what the ticketing company, they're involved in everything. However, we have seen agents instigated. That's been very effective. Again, I pick up SJM have been particularly effective on this. John Cornwall, Matt Woollerscroft, Simon Moran, been really, really good. So, I think there is, I mean, David's assessment is right. Look, let's turn it on its head. 92% of nearly 6 million tickets that have been released since the 18th of December ministerial meeting, when we all of us agreed that it was going to be on every ticket, 92% of those tickets don't have it. What's gone wrong should be the question, rather than look how wonderful we're doing on the 8%. I think it's not a complacency, and I should also say, sorry to be so long, but I should also say, listen, it is a difficult part of the year. But when we had the ministerial meeting on the 18th of December, the decision was there won't be very many tickets released in this period. Well, nearly 6 million tickets were released. That sounds like quite a lot to me, and only 8% of them having the levy seems like quite a low ambition target. Were it to carry on at that rate of increase, we would eventually get to a full blanket levy, which I think everybody on the panel wants to see, by roughly 2032. Doesn't seem like that's got a lot of speed behind it.
Thank you. Rupert.
Yeah, no, thanks everyone. It's quite a depressing picture that you're painting of this kind of shrinking sector. And we all know that there's rising costs for venues and also cost of living crisis for the people coming from outside. Managers and agents are sort of only dependent on the success of the artists that they promote. Are they also shrinking? Are there managers leaving the sector? I mean, are we ever going to have Brian Epstein and Malcolm McLaren? Are those people gone?
I mean, that's a great question. Hopefully not. But having spoken to a lot of my friends and peers who are managers or agents, they're finding it really tough. A lot are leaving the country, if I'm going to be honest. A lot are moving elsewhere where they feel there is more infrastructure and support for the kinds of work they do.
So there are other countries that do it better than us, and who should be the examples?
Spain, Portugal, France, America. There's a lot going on there. A lot of business opportunities being offered out over there. I know for me and my partner, we've had opportunities to take Globetown over there. We have not done that yet because we love British culture, we love our artists, we love the world here. But, stuff is really tough, especially at the emerging level. I'm only operating, we started our business sort of just shy of the pandemic, so I don't really know what the world pre-pandemic looked like. But navigating it now definitely isn't all that easy. Not that it's meant to be, obviously, but...
Anyone else, Joff, you're dying to get in.
I think, it's not all doom and gloom. I think once you get past a point, there's money to be made in the industry. And we know that, right? People are going and seeing shows, people are buying tickets. This whole thing is about the grassroots, isn't it? And it's about how those feeder channels feed up into that. And, like I said earlier, I think the big issue is that, rising cost barriers to entry are high. So we just need a little bit of support, I think, for the grassroots to help people make that step forward where they can start making a living and start making income. Music is big business. It is big business. But, if we don't fund that stuff at the beginning, you're not going to get those new artists emerging that will, be, making money and providing, tax receipts and all the rest, employing people.
I think specifically on this question of what's happening elsewhere or what the conditions are for managers and agents, yes, there we are definitely seeing what you might describe as a brain drain. Frankly, Mary, you would be well served to go to France. I know that's a bit of a shocking thing to say to a UK committee, but there are significant funds available in France that simply are not available here. Interestingly, again in praise of the work of this committee, what we're seeing is the work of this report, which I brought a copy of so I can refer to it. It's one of my favourite documents. This is happening elsewhere. These recommendations were so good, they're being looked at by Australia, they're being looked at by Germany, they're being looked at in Canada and the US. I'm not sure why we haven't done them here. You know, I mean, it's as simple as that. We are now falling behind because we're not acting fast enough on a report that's explained. We've made it too difficult to run a venue, to be a promoter, to be an artist, to be a sound engineer, a lighting engineer. There's too many costs, there's not enough support, and we are falling between the cracks. And so, no, I'm not going to recommend that everybody who's currently trying to make a career in the UK should flee to one of these countries, because I think we're still one of the world's, if not the world's, leading cultural agency for music. But the reality is we do not have the conditions, especially, I want to pick up on Joff said, especially in our working class communities, in areas of the country that have fallen out of having ready access to culture. What are we saying to people who live there? We're saying culture's not for you. We have to not just turn around and take this evidence, the stuff that you gave us. We need to be opening venues, creating areas of opportunity, opening venues that have got rehearsal spaces and recording studios in them. So there's a music hub in every community. We're really falling behind on this.
And as part of this changing ecosystem, if the pipeline is not there with the venues, I mean, we get figures from the British Bar and Pub Association that there's a shocking number of pubs every week closing. Does this mean that also, I mean, Joff, groups are less, I don't know, before there was a pub circuit, there was even a genre called pub rock. Mm-hmm. Whereas now, if I go into a boozer, it's always a covers band. Does that mean people are less risk-taking, less experimental? I even ended up at these BAFTAs on the weekend with Channel 4, and there was a couple of live bands, and they said that the minute these come on, it's like an ad break. The audience goes and makes a cup of tea or switches off because people don't want to hear new music. I mean, I was a bit shocked at this.
I would disagree with that. I think there's a pretty healthy market for music and new music. I know, David, do you want to pick up on?
Yeah, I think apologies for repeating myself. I think I've said this before. What we're seeing, take our Step Up program, for example, which is Amazon Music Invest in. We're about to open Step Up for the 4th year. Every year we've seen, somewhere between 15 and 30% increase in applications. And additionally, the standard of those applications and the stage that the artists are at when those applications come in is increasing. So no, we're not seeing a lack of appetite. And also those artists that are applying are doing extremely well. They're finding an audience for their recorded music. We're seeing people come to us with millions of monthly listeners, yet they've never toured live. We've sort of flipped the model on its head, where it used to be quite expensive to get your music to market 25 years ago. And it was easy to go out and play, and that was how you built your audience. You talk about the pub circuit. Now it's the other way around. It's so expensive to get out and play, but we're seeing young artists develop audiences across streaming, across the internet, and have good followings. But two things are happening. They can't afford to go out and perform, and their audience can't afford to go out and see them. As it is, you're often seeing the price of a ticket subsidizing the rest of the night out. So inflationary costs on alcohol, on taxes, and all of these things that people spend when they go out has not been matched by the increase in ticket prices. I mean, and the reason for that is because basically that ticket price the artists are sort of unable to raise those ticket prices for fear of depleting those audiences further. Taking petrol, for example, I made a note on petrol. I think 1994, a gallon of petrol was around £2.50. Today it's around £6.63. With inflation, it should have been about £4.43. And so actually it's gone far above the Bank of England inflation rate. And that's one of the costs that has to be subsumed into the ticket cost. So the demand we see across recorded music, the demand for live music more broadly, if you look at the top of the pyramid, we've seen record sales on those very large shows, which again underlines the point of the levy. Let's feed that pipeline from those shows that are booming at the top.
And if you don't support that stuff at the bottom, all we're going to have in 10 years' time is just, we're going to have people just going to US pop stars in Wembley. And that's, you're not creating those pipelines, you're not going to get that infrastructure, or, Do
you think those things like Night Czars make a difference? So there was Amy Lemay, I don't think she's been replaced in London. There was Sacha Lord in Manchester, I think he's still in post. I know UK Music has said that every local plan, it's a council level thing, should include a commitment to music. Would those things make any difference?
There are some, Sasha's not with us and neither is Amy. and those were, I think, the first 2 nights I was appointed in the UK. We're broadly supportive of the concept of music boards, or I'm certainly supportive of music being included in cultural plans, and I can't think of any reason why it wouldn't be. However, there are some things to say, which is, listen, access to music in cities has held up better than it has elsewhere. It's really smaller cities, larger towns, certainly smaller towns. This is where spaces are closing, and as Marit said, this is where artists can't afford to go. We have people who live literally hundreds of miles away from their nearest possible experience of new and original music. It's an astonishing thing to say in a country who really, our cultural identity around the world is very much based on music.
Just lastly, is it the case that more and more of your staff are freelancers? So does that make it difficult for you to retain and train?
An unfortunate outcome of the NIC increases in April is that we will probably have to see venues moving towards more freelance. But I think there is definitely opportunities to pursue tax policies and employment practices that would mean we could get back to more consistent employment. And I know the venues want to do that, and I know that the technicians and engineers would welcome that.
Thank you, Rupa. Liz.
Thank you, Chair. Mark, you mentioned artists who have backed the £1 donation idea, including Katy Perry, Coldplay and Pulp. What has been the result of these donations?
No money's been received at all yet, because the way that the music industry works, everything is accounted and delivered after. So I think that's a good opportunity to mention, listen, the earliest that any money that's been raised is going to hit any artist or any venue or any promoter is not until 2026. You know, the way that it's accounted, the way that it'll have to be assessed. This should be a robust process. Yeah. You know, we're very supportive of the work of Live Trust in creating a receiving house and making sure that that money is properly brought in and properly accounted. And then there's lots of different ways to get money out to venues, artists, and promoters. But it should be done very robustly. Any time you start distributing the sort of money that we should be seeing from a blanket levy, we need to be very, very open, transparent, upfront with exactly what's happening with it. And how it's being distributed and who's receiving it and what it's achieving. So all of those things will need to be in place. I think it's going to be February 2026 before any of that money is actually being used to put an additional tour on, to make sure a venue doesn't close down, to enable a promoter to take a risk. So it's not a quick and sharp process. This is one of the reasons that I think I strongly want to recommend the committee that this must be assessed, progress on the blanket levy must be assessed at the end of every quarter, because were we to leave it for excessive periods of time, let's imagine we don't assess it again until December, well, that would wipe out all of 2026 receipts if they haven't managed to deliver the blanket levy. So I think we need to know what the progress is at the end of June, what the progress is at the end of September, the end of December. Without doing that, we could be years away from money actually having the effect that we want it to have on the ground.
Thank you. And if I could ask Marit and Joff, do you think fan support for the levy is sustainable given the cost of living crisis?
I think the thing that I would draw people's attention to is kind of current ticketing practices. You know, if you go to buy a ticket on, I'm not going to name, a ticketing website, you're often, sometimes upward of 20%, is it? Sometimes that people, those providers can put on top of tickets in kind of hidden fees and that kind of stuff. To me, it seems incredibly callous, that they would do that, but then resist a £1, levy on top of that to support, basically their businesses in the future as well. Do you know what I mean? This is about long-term investment, long-term planning. So I think there's a huge support. 80-odd% of...
93% of music fans in the Music Fans Voice survey said they supported a levy. Very interestingly, for all of us, actually, a bit of a learning experience for me, probably because of that 20% that's put on tickets, or can be 20%, they didn't care, frankly, where it came from. There was not a massive saying, it's got to be inside the ticket wrap. It was very evenly split. The main thing is, music fans want artists, venues and promoters at the grassroots supported. That's it. I mean, it's very comprehensive. It is a great opportunity to say one of the recommendations in the report was a fan-led review. The DCMS have not backed that so far. I honestly think that the major message that comes out of the Music Fans Voice survey is that fans' voice have been left out of this conversation. They have a lot to tell us, and we should be pushing for that fan-led review.
Marit, would you like to add anything?
I agree with Joff. I think fans just want to see artists. They want to support the artists. I mean, we're finding that across subscription-based models, because we're having to look at diversifying our artist businesses, obviously, because we're not making money from live. Streaming isn't great. So subscription-based models, and we're finding that, you know, if you're fans, they don't mind supporting. They don't mind committing a bit more of their income to seeing those artists continue to grow.
Thank you.
Thanks, Liz. Sarah?
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. So we've started to talk a little bit about the money going back to the grassroots. So from your perspective, Mark and David, what model is the best to get money to the grassroots? So is that the Live Trust working with member bodies, or something else perhaps?
There are a number of programs, Step Up Accelerator, our own Liveline. We've done a lot of work getting money out to all three of those groups, artists, venues and promoters. One thing that we are keen to do is to look where investments can be made that will help everybody in the sector, not just any one of those three. So typically when we have invested into artist touring, for example, we have paid the costs of the venue, the promoter and the artist. I'm not saying that any one of those three isn't a good thing to do, but I would certainly say that doing all three at once means that shows are viable, everybody's able to make it economically sustainable. The other thing we would like to see is we do need to look at the different way they do touring in different countries and how has that happened. So particularly I would pick out rehearsal spaces. Joff mentioned these at the beginning. Listen, there's a lot of spare space in music venues. We could be converting that to rehearsal spaces. We could be putting sound insulation in so that artists have better rehearsal spaces and more rehearsal spaces across the country. Artist accommodation, I did band management for 10 years. Every band I had touring across Europe always had artist accommodation, whether it was in the venue or it was down the road from the venue that the venue had a deal with. Who gets rich from touring? I will name some companies. Premier Inns, BP and Ginster's Pasties. So look, I want to invest in a way that means that we can get rid of some of those things. There are a couple of other people I would get rid of. Landlords, we need to do much more about the ownership of these buildings. And the government. Look, 16% of every pound that somebody hands over at this Grassroots Music Venue goes straight to the HM Treasury. That is a tax on research and development, and it hits the artist hardest of all because they're the ones who are, contractually get more of any profit that's made. So, I mean, we need to get rid of these things. Let's get rid of these excessive business rates, the VAT. Let's find artist accommodation. Let's make rehearsal spaces and recording spaces more available everywhere in the country. Those sorts of investments may sound a bit fantastical, but with the amount of money that would be raised by a blanket levy, they are things we can think about. This year alone, there are already 22.3 million tickets on sale for arenas and stadiums in this country. That's £22.3 million we could be spending right now. There are different opinions about priorities of investments. I'm going to say that within £22.3 million, every great idea we've got could be funded. We can explore lots of different ways of doing it. So we have no particular objectives going into that process. But the Live Trust is a great mechanism for assessing those investments and thinking about what we can do most effectively.
Thank you, Mark. David, did you have anything to add on that?
Whilst we think that there should be a blanket levy, not a system of artist-led donations, as I've said, we do think that Live is the best vehicle to receive and distribute those funds to grant awarding bodies, and John Collins will be able to speak to that more. So we are supportive of that. We've been forceful, some might say, on the need to directly fund artists. And the reason for that, from the income from the levy, and the reason for that is threefold, really. It drives artists' careers, it drives audience pipeline, and it drives all of those that the artists pay for, and that is a lot of people. So Michael Rapino, the CEO of Live Nation last week in their earnings call said every night we are bringing a Super Bowl to a stadium, and it's the artist that funds that. And that's right. And equally, the National Independent Talent Organization in the US that represents agents and managers did a breakdown of a $100 ticket. And Mark sort of talked about the artist making profit. Actually, the artist might be making income, but they're not necessarily making profit. Of that $100 ticket, about $22 is fees. Venue expenses are in there, promoter fees are in there. The artist is taking home, after all of the costs that they pay for, about $8 on that. So our view is that it's essential that you put the funding into the hands of artists at the grassroots end, because whilst that's a $100 ticket, the same can be extrapolated for the grassroots artists. They're paying out the vast majority of that. They're driving that activity, which will support venues, which will support promoters, but will also support all of those that rely on artists for their income.
Okay, and talking about getting money to artists, the Arts Council provided a grant to set up UK Artists Touring Fund. How long do you think it will be before you're able to start getting that money to artists?
Haven't yet, but we hope that they will provide that grant. They've been supportive of it. So the UK Artists Touring Fund has been a response to the levy. Step Up has been mentioned a few times, which is our programme with Amazon Music. Actually, we think that the UK Artists Touring Fund is needed because it's a different type of vehicle. So a vehicle to basically provide tour support. So top up those amounts that I told you that artists had lost before to make touring viable. Our aim is to have that ready when the Live Trust is ready to distribute funds from the levy, or from the donations, I should say.
One final question. Can I come to Joff and anyone else can chip in briefly after? So the FAC board has said it's important to keep Live Trust independent. What do you think is the best way to do that?
I'm sorry, I would have to defer to my man David on that. I'm sorry.
That's fine.
I think it's the transparency is going to be essential, and the selection of trustees is going to be essential. And yeah, beyond that, I think possibly John. I'm putting a lot on John Collins today.
We're just passing it down the line.
Possibly John Collins is best placed to answer that, but we think that independence and that transparency is essential.
Oh.
Can I just pick up on something at the grassroots level? I think we need to recognise that over a period of 30 years, an economic model has emerged which also presents further risks. Really, at grassroots level, it is the alcohol sales that are sponsoring pretty much everything.
It's the what, sorry, I missed
It's the alcohol sales. And when we're seeing this dramatic generational shift in the consumption of alcohol, I forget the exact figure I stand, but something like 30% among 16 to 25s. The ability of the venues. I mean, when I first promoted my first show over 40 years ago, I literally didn't have the bar. I just sold tickets, paid the headline band, paid the support band, paid the opening band, secure everything just from the sale of tickets. That model is pretty much gone at our level. You know, I deep respect for grassroots promoters who I don't think get enough mention in this conversation. These are the people that are spotting talent and bring it into the venues, and they are super important to that. We need to find a way that this money also supports them. But I mean, in 2024, the venues subsidised the production of live music by about £160 million across all our venues by the sale of alcohol. Now, you can argue it's part of the overall offer, but what happens when 30+% of your audience stop drinking alcohol? And I'm afraid the answer isn't kombucha. You know, it's going to need... We've been talking about this for years now. We started talking about a need for a levy in 2018. The reason we did that is we could see the trends. You know, actually, this particular activity that Joff's gone through, that Marit's artists are going through, this is absolutely vital, and it sits at the core of who we are as a music nation. Without this stuff, we're not going to produce the artists that we need. It's research and development. The one thing I definitely wanted to say today, there's too many people in the industry regarding this as some sort of charitable donation. Yeah. It's not charitable, it's simple R&D. And the way the music industry is conducted now, we don't have enough commitment to R&D in the live side of the industry. I'm sure David would feel there's not enough coming from streaming as well. But it's right. You know, other countries are getting this right.
On that point, perhaps David, if you want to answer it. I mean, I agree with you on the R&D. I think if this was a sort of scientific endeavour, it would be privy to R&D tax credits for sure. The argument would be well made, and as somebody that's had those conversations with our government, it doesn't resonate, sadly. But to that point, as a business cost, are you surprised, or indeed do you see the emergence of streamers into this space, recognising their need to cultivate grassroots music for successive portfolios?
You mean streaming platforms?
Or streamer companies having taking more cultivation of grassroots music venues, since the streaming revenue begins with the emerging artists starting and finding their feet, cutting their teeth.
I think there's a misnomer there's no money in streaming. There's money in streaming. It's a very similar conversation to that we're having here in live music. It's concentrated at the top of the pyramid often. Yeah. But actually the problems that we see with streaming are actually more related to recording contracts than how streaming works per se. I'm not saying it's perfect. So actually what we would say is that there's no point in sort of muddying the water, I suppose. There's enough money in live music for live music to support the development of live music. You look at, for example, I mean, Mark's right. We look at this as an expense. It's an investment. Look at the Music Export Growth Scheme. On the activity that it funds, it returns to the UK purse about £14 per pound. You look at the UK's music industry. From 2023 to 2024, it grew at a rate of 13%, £7.6 billion. That's way faster than the rest of the economy. And you look at the way that artists who are invested in grow. We know that they always return more than the investment. So we do need to stop looking at it as a cost. But I personally, I won't speak for the FAC board on this, but I personally don't think we need to muddy the water with cross-contaminating the streaming and the live thing.
But isn't that the problem? Because I don't see that as muddying the waters. I see it as recognising the ecosystem of, if you're a music fan, you don't see it as muddying the waters that you see the band live and you stream them after, or vice versa. And in fact, you routinely are told when the band you've been listening to are now coming to an area near you, there's clearly an interest in promoting the artists. It strikes me as somebody that's observed, particularly around at the time of COVID, when that ecosystem was arguing for an insurance model to back up the lost earnings. Actually, isn't the industry ready to recognise the benefit of being mutually dependent on one another, but sometimes a bit too selfish within its own borders?
I think you're right. Both the fan and the artist don't go, I'm going to follow music because I just care about live or I just care about recording. Similarly, probably very few artists are going, I'm getting into this industry because I just want to do recorded music. Most artists want to play live as well. But the pandemic example is a good one, I think, because actually for a decade prior to the not immediately prior to the pandemic, but for a decade prior to the pandemic, the recorded music sector was in the doldrums. The live sector wasn't being called on to support the recorded music sector at that point. And I don't think the issue is that, I think that recorded music money should be distributed more fairly to those that are involved in the recorded music sector. And I think that the live music money should be distributed more fairly to those that operate in the live sector. I don't think it's necessary. There is enough money in each of those parts. You're right that it's an ecosystem. You're right that fans don't see it as two separate things. And you're right that artists don't. But I don't think it's necessary. There is enough money in the system to make this work. We've just talked about £22 million worth of income potentially for a levy. So I completely agree with you on the sort of overall picture. And I actually think that in terms of a music strategy for the UK, I think that may have been talked about in the last report. We've frequently talked about that. There hasn't, since I've been in this role, there hasn't been a UK music strategy.
Yeah, that's a point. We're going to move on. Damien.
Thank you very much. Can we come back to business rates, which we've already talked about a little this morning? And obviously the way that the reduction in relief was done, so we had the 75% came down to 40%, but the cash cap stayed the same, which mathematically means that the effect is felt more on smaller venues than it is on larger venues. Mark, I wonder if you could just say a word about what the practical effect of the business rate change has been for venues.
Well, let's be blunt. The practical effect is that at this point we have more venues in the venue emergency service than ever before, which is a thing we run for venues. We have had to write to every local authority in the country encouraging them to do discretionary rate relief in the absence of the government support.
And have you had much positive response to that?
Local authorities have also run out of money.
Yeah.
I think the question really is, sometimes the scale of a problem, because it's so specific, gets lost. I don't believe the country's finances will be saved by £7 million from music venues that haven't got it. And so you have to ask, why do music venues get left out of these things when we have such an authoritative report? And so I think there's big questions there for government about a lot of words and not very many actions. You know, it would not harm the country's finances virtually less than 0.001% to keep that rate relief in place. As it is, we are now dealing with venues who are very close to closure, simply from that one measure. And then when they've received their NIC bill at the end of April, even closer to closure. So we are directly having to put money out to venues to pay business rates. As a charity, we're giving money to venues to pay their business rates. It's an absurd position to be in when the noises about how much we value these venues and how important they are so clear.
So there's more change coming to business rates due in April 2026, and of course there's always the possibility of further reform. So as a committee, we write reports to the government making recommendations, making asks. Just spell out for us clearly what you think that ask should be.
I would very specifically pick on two things. One, these are the ignition engines of a nighttime economy experience. People leave their house to go to the gig and then they spend money on taxis, on hotels, in bars, restaurants, etc. If you want to get the nighttime economy thriving, you need these kind of experiential draws, whether it's the cinema or whether it's music venues. So taxing music venues for providing that ignition engine is a very strange way to do it. The second thing I'd say is we're seeing a massive growth in not-for-profit entities. So when I started this work in 2014, less than 3% of all the venues in the country were registered as a not-for-profit entity. Latest figure in our 2024 report was 33%. It's actually heading towards 37% already this year. Now, what should happen then is, if we have a not-for-profit entity, they should qualify for local discretionary rate relief. So for the committee, and that hasn't happened, for whatever reason, whether it's the tightness of the local authority finances or whatever. But for the committee, I would strongly recommend that at a minimum, venues that are registered as not-for-profit entities, community interest companies, charities, etc., really should be being offered the same rate relief we give to theatres, art centres, performing arts spaces. That reduces their business rates by 80%.
Thank you. Just very briefly on NICs, I think I heard you say earlier that the increase in employer national insurance contributions would prompt more venues to engage with freelancers rather than salaried or waged employees. Did I hear that correctly?
Yeah, I'm afraid, I mean, it's not actually, the increase is a challenge, the increase in the headline rate. It's the reduction of the qualifying rate from £10,000 to £5,000.
Was it the overall effect?
Yeah, that brings a huge swathe of people who are sometimes as sound engineers, sometimes in a band, sometimes on tour, sometimes working at the venue. It brings them into qualifying for national insurance contributions. Weirdly, as a statistical anomaly, there were a lot of people between £5,000 and £10,000 who suddenly you have to pay national insurance on. So the solution to that is sadly not to employ them.
Just to be clear, I'm not asking you to play the role of a Treasury civil servant, but that would mean, as a result of that change, if I as a venue were taking on more freelancers, self-employed people, fewer wage and salaried employees, that would actually be less tax revenue for the Treasury.
Yeah, and the highest, it's a bit difficult to calculate because obviously we can't be that granular. If the maximum impact it could be, wait for it, rather conveniently is £15 million. And the reason I say rather conveniently is if you put together the £7 million in business rate increases and the potential £15 million of NIC increases, you get to £22 million, which is what we're hearing a lot might be raised by the grassroots levy. So even if you gave it all to venues, we would currently be treading water. I don't think that was the intention of the levy. So again, I want to go back to how excellent this report was. And later, when you have the minister here, I think it's very important not just to ask about the grassroots. What is the government actually doing about any of the recommendations that you created for them? That's really the central question. Lots of pressure on the grassroots levy, obviously required, but that can't be the limit of it. I think we think these are, I think in the foreword of our own annual report, we quoted Chris Bryant's response to you. These are the research development labs of the UK music industry. Well, let's treat them like that.
Thank you, Mark. Thank you, Jeff.
Thanks so much, David. Can I just ask one more question? Marit, the MMF has just rolled out a certification for managers which incorporates CISA standards. Do you think the rest of the sector is on the same page about this?
Get back to you on that one.
The rest of the sector. Yeah.
Hold on. We can't. I mean, thank you. We can't take you. So, I mean, basically, out of 9 out of 10 witnesses, out of the 9 witnesses today, you're one of only 2 women appearing in front of us. Do you think that's a fair reflection of what it's like to work in live music?
Maybe. I don't know. There are obviously some very amazing women in this industry. The MMF has an incredible female leadership team, but it is still a male-heavy industry.
You understand what CISA is, the Creative Industries Independent Standards. It's about signing up to a process by which everyone agrees to behave appropriately, and
Oh, that sounds great. No, I didn't know what
you're
that
happy.
was. Thank you for
So
that.
the MMF have just rolled out certification for managers that basically signs up to those practices, which
That sounds great.
you'd endorse.
Yeah,
Okay.
entirely happy to endorse that one.
Thank you. All right, thank you very much, team. Lovely to see you all. Really grateful for your time today. We're going to take a quick break while we bring in our second act. Thank you very much.
Sure.
Steve. Good. Same. To our second panel, we know that there has been some progress in getting money to the grassroots. Around 8% of arena and stadium tickets reportedly now include a donation to grassroots music in some capacity. However, I think it's fair to say that many would hope that the industry goes further and farther. and faster on getting this adopted. And of course there are others that just hope this goes away. So without further ado, we're going to hear from John Collins, CEO of Live Industry Venues and Entertainment, known as Live. You've already heard his name mentioned quite a lot during the course of this previous session. To Steve Homer, Board Director and Concert Promotions Association and CEO of AEG Presents UK, and Nancy Skipper, Operations Manager at the National Arenas Association. You're all very welcome, and thank you so much for joining us this morning. I'm going to start off by passing over to Bayo.
Thank you, Chair. Morning, John. What tangible progress has been made on levy negotiations since the previous report?
A lot. It's been a very hectic year. If we go back 12 months, the trust was a concept, and we came in front of the committee to talk about what we thought we could do. And then over the summer months into the autumn, we worked with the Charity Commission to get the trust registered, and we finally achieved that in December. In parallel, we were having discussions at the Live Board about how do we want the voluntary levy to work? What do we need to do to make sure that we build something that lasts for decades and has rigour, credibility, and that talks to appointing trustees. And then at the very end of the year, we achieved that Charity Commission registration. We announced that in January. And then in the last 4 months, we've seen an acceleration in the concerts and tours that are adopting the contribution as part of the sort of tour planning. So yeah, it's been a hectic 12 months.
Brilliant. Okay. So the Music Venue Trust says 7.5%, we've spoken about earlier today, but it says 7.5% of shows announced since the 18th of December have pledged to donate. So my question is, probably to all of you, but I'll start with yourself, John. Is that enough? Is that sufficient progress?
It's progress. Caroline used the phrase further, faster. That's the mantra. It's how do we go further, faster? What blockages do we need to remove? How do we get everybody putting their shoulder to the wheel? So actually, I think and Steve may talk about the cycle of the tour planning process, because that's a factor here as well about, shows that went on sale in January were probably being discussed last June when the trust was still a sort of notional concept. So there'll always be a sort of lag in how this builds. But, we announced a couple of weeks ago that we'd passed £500,000 in the tours that were pledged. I need to be careful. I don't want to mislead anybody. That doesn't mean we get £500,000. It means the tours that have announced, the tickets for those tours are more than £500,000 because we know the capacity of the rooms. But obviously not every show may sell out completely. Some shows may not happen. So we won't know the money that comes through until those shows have happened, the accounting's been done, and it comes back to us. But we announced that 2 weeks ago, and sitting here today, we're now over 700,000 in tours that are supporting, because we had Lord last week, Ed Sheeran last Friday. So this is building, and we're building momentum, but we're not complacent. Further, faster is the mantra.
Enough. I was talking to the Prime Minister for a minute, so I'm impressed. Nancy, can I come to you, please? Again, the same question to you, is this good progress?
I think it's logical progress because, as John's touched on, it's a life cycle and it takes considerable time for the conversation to take place with the artist, the agent, and the promoter. And once all of those processes are completing, then you will start to see more and more artists come on stream with this, and I think it's actually something Steve could elaborate on brilliantly in his capacity as promoter.
Over to yourself, Steve.
Thank you. Well, I think to go back to where it started in January, we literally went from a standing start there as an industry, in terms of the conversations were then starting to be had. Myself with artists that I work with, you start having the conversation with the agent, with the manager, and they then talk to the artists themselves to get them engaged and understand what we're looking to achieve by this. It's a big ask to go to an artist and say, we want to increase your ticket price, but this is the benefits that are going to come from the other side of this if this happens. So, you know, it is a process that you go through as a promoter or anyone else in the food chain to actually instigate the conversation and then to come to a consensus and agreement in this and then actually announce it. So what's been achieved so far, I think, from where it started, and bearing in mind that January and February are times where there's not a lot of activity in terms of things going on sale, there's more towards February. So the first sort of 6 weeks of the year are often very slow for new tours announced. I think we've achieved quite a lot. You know, there's still more to come, but I do think the response throughout the industry from a range of different artists, both homegrown and international as well, has been very good, very strong.
Brilliant. My next question, actually, and this will be to sort of all of you. Prior to coming into Parliament, my background was in the creative sector, so as a promoter, a venue owner, and a show producer. And so, in terms of the tribulations of trying to sort of support and spot and nurture talent, I do understand. So, the blanket levy is also a policy that would have certainly interested myself when I was operating venues and producing shows. So what I'm asking yourselves, and I'll start with Nancy, is a blanket levy possible?
It's possible in terms of, from an arena point of view, we can add the levy, but we would be in an administrative capacity, so we don't have any decision making on whether it's added. If the show asks us to add it, then we would add it. So from an admin point of view, we can do it, but it does depend from our side on the buy-in from all of the other parts of the ecosystem which come before for us.
And Steve, would you like to?
I think the blanket levy question is a little bit difficult to deal with in terms of, I think you need the artist to accept it and adopt it, you know. And I think, you know, I've experienced a few questions that come back in terms of when these funds become real, where are they going to go and how is that going to be administered? Which part of the industry is this going within the grassroots makeup? Where is it going to go to? And I think that's an important consideration, because it's all well and good saying that we're going to raise this money, but I think the artists will have an invested part in where it may land for them, you know, in terms of that they may have a preference in supporting either venues or promoters or other artists, you know, in the infrastructure. So I think to have it as a blanket one, I really do think having the artist work towards it and adopt it is such an important buy-in, because I think that only means that they're going to support it on future tours. We're not just asking it for this is to be the first tour that they're going to commit to, but, you know, with other artists that we're looking at, you know, you want them to be supporting it continually through their career when they're at that level. So, you know, you want those artists to be saying, right, you know, for the next 20 years when I'm touring, I want to be potentially committing to this. So, you know, I think having sight of where the money goes is important to those particular ones.
Okay. And so when you, thank you, Steve. So when you're looking at the sort of challenges of putting on bands, on touring, and then you look at the sort of the possibility of, you know, the sort of voluntary levy, do you think that the adoption of the levy is something that sort of people within that ecosystem would embrace, mandatory or voluntarily? And that's to yourself.
Thanks. Yeah, they are, I think. You know, when we're looking across the way Live is structured, we have 15 associations that sit on our board. So we have venues, artists, promoters, managers, agents, all represented, along with ticketing, production, and the wider sector. And there's been a tremendously sort of communal spirit there from the very start of our discussions about making this happen. You know, it is a voluntary initiative, so it is about winning hearts and minds and bringing everybody along with you, and that does take time. But, you know, what we've seen from the tours that have already been announced is, you know, some have The majority have been sort of promoter-led. It's been the promoter that's sort of marshalled the conversation. But then we've had agent-led tours coming on board. We've had artists instigating that the tour comes on board. And prior to the trust, Mark's already mentioned them, but Ian Johnson, the manager at Enter Shikari, was instrumental in making that happen there. So there is a collective will. It's just a question of how we build that over time.
Okay, thank you. And I know that, Nancy, you mentioned earlier about the sort of the ecosystem, something that we've not mentioned within the ecosystem of talent. I suppose we've referenced sort of venues, radio stations, record labels, all those sort of key sort of stakeholders in nurturing and spotting talent. Do you think that has an impact on spotting talent and actually sort of giving promoters the sort of confidence to produce shows?
In terms of does the levy do that? I think anything that encourages more attendance in the venues and promotes the venues themselves can't do any harm, but I'm not sure how the levy specifically would help with that. Do you, Steve? Do you think?
Not particularly with the
I think
it's more about awareness of artists.
It is. I mean, on radio, we probably got most animated on radio when there was threats to BBC introducing, because we know what a great role that plays at the local level in giving emerging talent a platform. But in terms of how the levy is structured and how we work, we've been very clear this is about the trust being the vehicle to receive the pound from the concert ticket. So a bit like David's point, yes, there are other parts of the music space that can be doing things and have a role to play, and we would very much welcome them stepping forward to do things. But for us, it's about making the trust as successful as possible.
Okay. Thanks, Jack. Hi, John. Hi, everybody. Thanks for this morning. John, you were mentioning quite a lot in the first session. I've got a specific question for you. Have you raised specifically, and have you specifically asked Live Nation to get involved in this? They were decidedly absent from the list of praise that one of the previous witnesses
Yes, yeah. So Live Nation are actively involved in the discussion and the process in terms of having a seat at the Live board, because one of their presidents is the chair of the CPA that Steve's representing today. So they've been part of the process from the very beginning. I've been in and briefed their communal group of promoters meetings that they have. They've shared the papers that we've prepared on the trust and sort of cascaded them through the company. They are party to some of the tours that have been announced. So DF Concerts, which is part of Live Nation, are promoting the Mumford & Sons and the Pulp shows in Scotland. SJM were the main force behind bringing those tours into the trust. So I think I would like them to move further and faster, but I'd like everybody to move further and faster on this.
When do you think they will become part of the programme?
Well, I mean, they would definitely say they are. They're in conversation, they're part of conversations. So I think that they're in there already.
When will conversation turn into action?
Yeah.
Well, again, they would say they have, through DF Concerts, they've been part of Mumford & Sons and Pulp. I would imagine some of the other shows that we've mentioned here, they're the promoter for those as well. So it's a question of, I think and this isn't just a Live Nation point, but for lots of people in the sector, we're selling them a concept at the moment. We're trying to get them to buy into something that hasn't delivered anything yet. And I actually think we are growing momentum, and we are seeing more shows come on board more rapidly. And I think once we get to that point where you're seeing shows deliver funds and funds deliver programs, then actually it's going to become the norm. That's what we're building to. It isn't about one company. It's about the whole sector, actually, so that when there's a discussion, it's the promoter, the agent, the manager, the artist, the arena, primarily from a sort of administrative point of view, all saying, are we doing this? Yes, we are.
Okay. Changing topic. The Minister's talked about developing a 10-point plan or a 10-plus point plan for music. what would you like to see that DCMS hasn't already committed to?
I mean, there's a lot. there's a lot on the shopping list. I think we don't have tax reliefs in this sector, so I do think, and particularly there's a very clear-cut case for a festival tax relief, because it's very obvious who's taking the risk and who's putting their money on the line, and who's and the margins in festivals means that we had 78, cold time last year. So I think there are fiscal things around tax relief. We'd obviously love to return to the discussion on VAT, being 20% here and 5.5% in France and 7-8% in the markets we're competing with. So there's not just a grassroots issue around VAT, but international competition, competitiveness point. Where do you put that stadium show? London at 20% or Paris at 5.5%. It's a consideration, and it's a consideration that at the margins is reducing the number of shows that we are that are coming here, and combined with the challenges around EU touring, risks our position as being a hub for international touring when artists come into Europe. So I think there are fiscal elements, there's sorting out EU touring, and obviously the summit is happening next week, and we believe we are in the mix for discussion there. We know it's a manifesto commitment, and we're very aware that ministers are really serious about looking to deliver that, so that's great. More broadly, can we have a music export office, please, to compete with Canada, Australia, South Korea, who are taking share of the global market? David's already demonstrated the return on investment that we get. There's an issue with visas and moving international talent in and out of the country. We think there needs to be some special consideration of, if you can only apply for your visa 3 months before a show, but the show goes on sale 9 months before that, or 6 months before that, that creates another element of risk that compromises our ability to maximise the number of shows. Sort out secondary ticketing and remove the touts, and let's finish with let's save the planet and work together on sustainability. Because there are things government could do around grid connectivity for outdoor spaces, and also working with metro mayors to build travel into the gig ticket.
That was quite a guitar solo, John. Well done. Same question, really, because you've crept onto my question, which was going to be about EU touring. So just to Steve and Nancy, please, on the issue of touring. It's been EU touring. It's been suggested that the government will push for a deal on EU touring, something I've supported, and I know colleagues in the session today have. We'll be doing a session on this later in the year, but what would a good deal on touring look like for the UK?
Good deal for touring in the UK, I would say just to
for the UK, not in the UK, for the UK in regard to EU touring. Yeah.
Do you mean artists touring coming from Europe into the UK?
UK artists to the EU. Yeah.
Right. UK artists to the EU. Again, the resistance to all the costs that actually come with the touring element on that, in terms of actually, in terms of now that you need the, to go into Europe, it's a far more expensive way of touring now compared to where it was pre-Brexit, and it's definitely a consideration that artists have when they come internationally anyway, to come, how many stops they make, whether it's just the UK or in Europe. UK artists are definitely struggling when they look at Europe as an option. So anything that would ease that would certainly be beneficial.
Nancy?
I think from my point of view, it's difficult for me to comment because we're purely based in the UK, but anything that generates greater touring content either way, if an artist in the UK can then create a bigger tour and go on to tour Europe more easily, or if the European artists come, then that generates content in the arena, so that's positive.
John, yeah, please.
Very quickly, just to add that any deal with the EU needs to cover artist, crew, kit and merch. It can't just be about the 9180 in Schengen. It has to be about how we carnets, cabotage, making it easier to take kit in. And also, merchandise is a critical part of touring.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, James. Let's go back to Bayo.
Thank you. So the government has now said it will introduce a statutory levy if discussions don't result in progress. Are sceptics and holdouts on the levy apathetic towards this outcome? That's to all of you. Who would like to take that first?
Well, as I sit on the Concert Promoters Association, I think there's very much a general consensus that they don't want it to be statutory, because they feel that if it became a statutory levy, then it could be distributed outside of the world that we function in. And that would be something that would be against the principle of which it's been set up in, to actually help sustain the businesses that we work within. So I think there's definitely a recognition that the importance of it to stay under the control of the Live Trust is very important to us as a body. If we're supporting this, we feel it has to generate the revenue for the people that work within our industry.
And you trust the Live Trust too?
I trust the promoters. They're a bunch of very individual people, shall we say, being polite. You know, promoters are a very odd breed of people, and I class myself as one of them. But I think between us, we all have that, even though we disagree at times, the general consensus is that that is the way of direction that we want this to go, and we want it to remain as a voluntary thing.
Nancy?
The arenas would say the same. They would favour a voluntary levy. I think the obstacles that they face in regards to the arrangements around the VAT and how those are treated, if that could be resolved first, you should be getting to the bottom of that before we go down the statutory path, from our point of view.
And so, in terms of the sort of promoters and the arenas, you both feel that as an industry, you will trust yourselves to think collectively in terms of the levy introduction?
Correct.
Okay. And the last to yourself as well. What would you like to
Yeah, the collective is in our DNA. Live was formed in response to lockdown when everybody came together as a sector. So we have, and it's one member, one vote. So it doesn't matter if you're representing the biggest companies in our sector or the independent elements. And it's artists, venues, promoters, festivals, agents, managers, production, all together communally to think about these things. So we've had a very clear steer from the board about how they think the trust should be constructed, how it should operate, and we know we need to balance the membership of the board of trustees to ensure that it has credibility for whichever direction you look at it, be that operationally, are the artist voice on there, is the venue manager, geographically, have we got voices from the nations and regions, and then of course characteristics as well, how we balanced by gender, ethnicity. We're quite close to the end of appointing the next wave of trustees. So we have 3 original trustees, we're now appointing a further 6, and it's been a bit of a 3D matrix of trying to balance all of those considerations, but we believe we've achieved a really strong set of further trustees who will then, I think, ensure that the trust has credibility with the wider industry.
Okay, brilliant. Thank you, John. Nancy, this is a question to you. So how can we make sure stadium shows as well as arenas shows are also in the scope of the levy?
Well, I can only speak on behalf of the arenas, but that would really have to be led by the artist side from the promoters.
It's a similar conversation that happens with arenas. It's just obviously there are fewer stadium shows that are there, but the same principle applies. The promoter would discuss with the agent, managers, artists about inclusion in the scheme, and that's I think there would have been. If the timing of this had been such, there would be more stadium shows that would have, that went on sale pre-Christmas, that weren't able to participate in this, that would have participated in this, and I think we'd have seen a broader span of stadium shows if it would have been early. It's just the timing and where we started from in January has made it more difficult to actually incorporate all the stadiums this summer.
Yeah, and we do have, through the Ed Sheeran shows that have been announced, they're taking place at Portman Road.
Yeah.
So I would class that as a stadium.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. My next question is, how do you respond to concerns that by relying on artists who advocate for the levy, the burden will fall mainly on them, including those who aren't at arena or stadium level? And that is a question to yourself,
Yeah.
John.
I mean, first of all, nothing should be being asked of artists that are playing anything below arena level, certainly in terms of the live trust. We're very clear about that. It's 5,000 capacity and above. And then in terms of how the decision is made, I don't believe that the burden falls on artists to be the sole decision maker, and it shouldn't. It should be a collective discussion between promoter, agent, manager, artist, and looking at the shows that have come on tour. Most recently, for example, the Lord shows, it was the agent that was the driver of that one. Ed Sheeran, I think it was the promoter and manager that were sort of the lead in the discussion. So artists, shouldn't be being positioned as the sole arbiter in this. What we do recognise is artists are far and away the most visible part of the process. And so I think we need to celebrate where the artists have supported. And then if artists are receiving criticism, I think we need to figure out, as our wider duty of care, how do we support them through that?
Okay. So some artists have chosen to donate directly to the trust. So where does this sort of leave the Live Trust and its sort of commitment to venues and artists and festivals and promoters?
Do you mean that artists have...
Yeah, so they've donated directly to the Music Venue Trust.
Oh, to Music Venue Trust.
Sorry.
Yeah, I think again that's partly Steve's point about the gestation of the trust and when shows go on sale, and actually Music Venue Trust and their Liveline Fund are very clear. If an artist wishes to incorporate £1 as a contribution into their shows, that should come to the Live Trust. There are legacy deals that were put in place before we existed, which are understandably going to MVT. But going forward, the Live Trust is the repository for that money.
Brilliant, thank you. Steve, Nancy, would you like to comment on that or add to that at all?
Yeah, no, I think with any new scheme, regardless of whether it sits in whatever industry, you're always going to get early adopters, and you're always going to get champions as well, that people that will be out front carrying the torch. And I think you've seen within this, from artists like Coldplay, which is what you're referring to in terms of the stadium, but people like Ed Sheeran, Katy Perry, there's been people that have adopted this very early on, and other people are almost like waiting to see where other artists lead. In terms of the scale of the artist, you can't get much bigger than Coldplay adopting a scheme like this, and other artists will consider them to be peers and will follow their lead. And so, it's very important that we have such a breadth of people that have championed this right from the start. But I think that will lead into more people just naturally wanting to be part of it because their peers and people that they look up to are also adopting this scheme for their tours. So I think it's as I keep saying, it's a great start. And I think, we're just in that early phases of it. And, the early adopters from promoters, artists, managers, agents are all there. And so we're just now waiting for everyone else to catch up.
Brilliant. Thank you, Steve.
Okay.
Thanks, Bio. Steve, you were here for the previous panel and you heard the witnesses tell us that we're going back. I think the Music Venue Trust told us that we're going backwards in terms of grassroots venue closures now. What it sounds like, it suggests to me that you're putting this very much on the onus on the artist to lead this. Do you think by doing that you're effectively letting some of your fellow promoters and arenas off of the hook?
I think for a start, it's the arenas will just be the administrative part. It's not like letting the arenas off because they'll just be part of the chain of operation, as it were. You know, as far as promoters are concerned, I think the onus is very much on the collective to actually go into this rather than just saying it's on the promoter's head. But I think, you know, this is recognition for an industry that is struggling at grassroots, and it's across, you know, it's not just the venues, it's artists and how they actually manage to perform. It's also touring staff as well, and how they, you know, Mark was explaining in terms of how there's a lot more freelancers now, you know, and festivals as well. So I think the overall is just that we're, sorry, there's an alarm going off, yeah. The overall is just about supporting the infrastructure out there, and I think that's the critical part, that we're literally trying to protect the future of the business, because as a national promoter, you know, ourselves as AEG, along with Live Nation and SGM, we all promote shows in grassroots venues, which are very much considered to be a lost leader, because as it's been explained before, no one makes money there, but you have to support emerging talent as best you can. So I think there's a lot of buy-in from all the promoters about how to nurture talent and the importance of our role in that.
Do you think everyone gets that? Do you think everyone understands that the whole industry only succeeds if there's a vibrant and flourishing ecosystem, or are there any blockers?
No, I genuinely think that all the promoters that are part of the CPA and across the country as well are very aware of the need to support the grassroots, because that's where most of the people that work in those industries came from. You know, we're all promoters that started using your money that you earn from your job to actually fund shows. That's the way it all starts. So, you know, like Mark was referring to, sort of independent promoters that are out there, and they don't have the benefit of having the bar revenue or anything like that, and it's all based on ticket sales. And that's a tough role to be in, but that's what we do.
And what about the government, John? How supportive are they? I mean, what conversations have you had with HM Treasury about the fact that they want to stick VAT on the levy, or take VAT off of the levy?
No, exactly. I think that's been a frustration. And where you do have people who are maybe at the more reluctant end of participating, when we are asked to do something and then the message back from the Treasury is there's no way around this, it has to be vatable. I do think that gives those people a sort of opportunity to say, well, this isn't really a partnership approach, is it? We're not really all in this together. So it's a frustration. I think we would like to find a way through that, and if that is that we can, the ideal would be that it's just exempt from VAT. We're having similar conversations with PRS where we think that we're finding a form of word so that the pound will not be PRSable. But the ideal would be to find the cleanest mechanism, so it's a pound in, pound out.
Yeah.
And at the moment, it feels a bit more like a classic. Treasury says no.
What are DCMS saying?
CMS are saying that we're talking to Treasury. We've asked, and Treasury have said no. I think they're I think they're looking at it more as if it's inescapable that this 20p has to be collected. Well, then how do we find a way that comes back to supporting music and supporting grassroots music in particular? And our answer to that would be, we'll just donate it back to the Live Trust.
Okay, thank you. Natasha.
Thank you. Sorry, John, you've got more talking to do. What is Live's long-term funding strategy for the Live Trust?
Mm-hmm. So it's about growing the take-up of the contribution until it becomes the norm. So the idea is that, as I say, we're about 716,000 tickets attracting the levy at the moment. And obviously not all of those may be sold, etc., etc. But so the next target has to be, okay, can we pass the 1 million this year? We feel that yes, we can. Particularly as Steve mentioned, there's a sort of peak period for tours to go on sale in the autumn months, post-festival season. And then I think it's a question of, well, can we move through the multiple millions next year? So 3-5 million showing progress. And then how rapidly can we get to the norm, which for me would be, are we seeing 80, 85%, 90% of tickets carrying the levy, at which point, as Mark touched on earlier, we would be looking at distributing 18-20 million pounds a year. We can do a lot with that.
And then, so as it came up earlier, that you've just appointed trustees, which is very exciting. But how will you be ensuring that they remain independent, but also that they've got the skills and the support to have good governance and keep things in line?
Absolutely. Yeah. No. So we created a matrix of what our ideal trustees would look like, and it would be of the industry, but not beholden to any particular part of the industry. Certainly no conflicts of interest around where potentially funding may go down the way, but that they have that expertise and experience, and ideally bring with them additional skills. Maybe that's financial, legal, have sat on other trusts. So James Ainscoe, for example, is one of the first trustees, is Chief Exec of the Royal Albert Hall. Very, very unlikely to ever be a recipient of any funds from the trust. Has previously run a charity, and so brings a lot of great awareness of how we need to structure the trust to be that independent and credible body.
And we've heard a lot from artists and grassroots music venues, but how will you ensure that the money gets to festivals and promoters as well? Obviously, we've heard a lot about the ecosystem and the wider way that this all connects, so how will you support that?
Yeah, I think so. Steve Lamack is my chair, and he said I should have tattooed on my forehead: artist, venues, managers, festivals. I got it wrong. Artist, venues, promoters, festivals. Because we've said that so many times. It is about ensuring that, when we sat here a year ago and talked with the committee, it's not just about venues. It isn't just about artists. It is about all of the people who are taking risk at that grassroots level and how we help them to mitigate that risk. So that's the directive we'll be giving to trustees. The two messages. One, we want to fund programs, not individual grant applications, because we know there are lots of great programs either out there or in development. And then secondly, the steer from the Live board to the Board of Trustees is it's artist, venues, promoters, festivals. So how do they want to translate that into an annual funding strategy?
And the promoters and the festivals that you're working with, what's their feedback's been at this point?
I think, again, this is a strength of Live. So the Association of Independent Promoters sits on our board. The Association of Independent Festivals sits on our board. The major promoters and festivals are really captured under the CPA. So it's inescapable when we are having a conversation, when I'm sending a briefing to the board, that I'm going to get the perspectives of all of those parties. It's just naturally how we function. Yeah.
You want me to? Was it me next for the next bit as well?
The next question is Rupa.
Hi. Yeah, thanks everyone. I think, John, you've alluded to this already, but I just wondered, do you agree with the government? The Minister has just walked in, and also with my private member's bill, that it's time to do something about secondary ticketing?
Completely. The touts, I think there's this vision of a tout as being a bloke in a camel hair coat stood outside a venue shouting any spares, and they do still exist. But actually, the reason we have such long queues on major on-sales at the moment is because of organised crime looking to harvest tickets through unleashing an army of bots to elbow the regular fan out of the way, grab those tickets and immediately put them onto the secondary sites at a huge markup. That money then disappears out of gig goers' budget, so they can't spend it on other tickets, they can't spend it on merch at the venue, and just doesn't come back into our system. So we're absolutely 100% supportive of action to cap secondary sales.
Stephen, Nancy?
Totally agree. As John was saying, the on-sale process now for major shows has been slowed immeasurably because of all the all the checks and balances you have to make sure to try and debot as many people out of the queue as possible. And there's also, different mechanisms as well to sort of sweep through to remove touts from the system as well. So there's a lot of mechanics that go in place from the ticketing people. The main thing to consider with that though is, the 100% of the time that the touts, they spend all their time trying to attack the ticketing systems and get tickets, whereas you can't spend that amount of time if you're Ticketmaster or Access or See Tickets, because you have to actually have the mechanic to sell the tickets. You're not just trying to fight off the touts. And so, it's a situation where it really needs addressing very strongly, because it's just costing audiences, fans and artists a lot of money, which should be going direct.
Ed Sheeran's made his kind of Ticketmaster resale proof, but I think at a lot of expense to himself. Any comment on that?
He's been very vocal from the very start, and very active from the start as well, about trying to make ways of keeping the resale of any tickets with a no increase in there, or a minimum increase to cover fees and things like that. He's been a very big champion of trying to eradicate secondary ticketing. So it's great that he supports it that strongly.
I think for the NAA point of view, they provide the box office staff who are the front line dealing with the customer and the customer service element of the outcome of the tout. So although Steve and John have both touched on the kind of large scale tout problem, there is also the smaller scale where the person has fallen foul of a scam or something that's not correct and appears at the venue on the night, can't get in, has spent this enormous amount of money, and face to face dealing with the upset of that. So the NAA also would support completely the cap.
What would you like to see come out of, actually there's two government consultations that are both closed now. There was a secondary ticketing formal consultation, there was a dynamic pricing call for evidence, and also the CMA, after the Oasis debacle of the summer, they launched one as well. What would your members, the three of you, like to see as a result of those?
I think swift action on secondary ticketing. So let's get a cap in place. There are different discussions about how that cap should sit, but let's just get legislation at the earliest opportunity and remove that unlimited profit incentive, which is why the organised crimes are in our sector at the moment. And then I think the lesson on dynamic pricing is it isn't always dynamic pricing. There's this idea that there's an algorithm there that is saying, right, we now need to move the price from this to this. As I understand it, that isn't typically or actually ever the way. It's more pre-arranged. We're selling this many tickets at this price, this many at this price, and that's very common if you think about a festival with an early bird ticket, or that's the classic example. So we want the ability still to move the price.
Okay. With a maximum markup or something, or?
Not in the original sale, no, because we spent all of this session talking about how artists can't make money. I don't think we should end it by talking about capping how much artists can make when they are the 0.0001% of artists who have the ability to move price to a certain point because they want to put on an arena stadium show with all of the production and costs that go around that.
I mean, Steve, when I was trying to do this bill, not many Conservatives would sign up to it, to be honest. They said it's too much state interference in our life. Like a plane ticket, people should be able to hike it up if there's demand. What do you think?
I think you quote the plane thing, but obviously we've submitted our views within the submission documents for that. But the weird thing is that tickets are the first thing that get criticised for the price. Whereas you talk about plane tickets or you talk about hotel surge pricing and things like that around when people suddenly buy tickets for a show at Wembley, all the hotels around Wembley are suddenly a lot more expensive than they were 24 hours before, before it went actually on sale. So, I often think in the experience piece, the ticket is one of the cheapest parts of the whole thing, and then the infrastructure goes wild around it, you know, in terms of hotels, travel, flights, you know, everything like that goes wild around it. So, you know, any form of being able to regulate it from the source is actually very useful for us.
I think from our point of view, it's obviously very difficult to ticket pricing, or the strategy for ticket pricing set by the promoter. So we would deal with it, but anything that impacts on us from a customer service point of view is not as favourable. But as Steve eloquently points out, there are other aspects of buying a ticket. You might buy a hotel room, you might go for dinner. Those things may or may not increase or decrease at the same time, but certainly from the term of setting the ticket price, that wouldn't be something that we would be involved in anyway.
I mean, that is another question I sort of had. I can understand when you buy something online what a delivery fee might be, but why are there things like print at home fee for using your own cartridge and your own paper? Why are there things like a facility charge fee? I don't know, there's always these mysterious things. There's the actual price and then what you pay at the end. And it's sometimes quite scary, but you feel pressured because you've got to the end of the process. Who does that money go to, those extra bits and pieces?
There are a variety of different ones. You've mentioned two there. So facility fees or restoration levies, which are sometimes charged by venues, goes to the venues. Different venues have different operating structures, so the way in which that's collected or distributed would be different. Print at home fees, I can't really talk so much
Things
about.
like daylight robbery, no? I mean, I think with the Kylie concert BST at Hyde Park, it was £89 for the ticket, £25 for this other stuff, nobody knows what it is, processing fee. Really? In the olden days, it used to cost less to get it online than going in person, and now it's gone the other way.
I think what I learned coming into this sector 3 years ago is that there are multiple parties around any event, any tour, any show. And so I think, you know, you've talked about fees there that would go back to the ticketing agency, fees that would go to the venue. I actually think there's a legitimate case for them, but it's, are we being transparent up front with the customer so that they understand? I don't think there's a case to remove any of those fees. I don't think you'd reduce the actual final cost of the ticket. It's just that actually the way the industry has evolved, we've ended up with this. There are elements, there's the ticket, and then there are elements that sit inside the ticket and things that sit outside.
Okay, well, the Minister is here, so any last-minute plea for him, you can vocalise it now, of what you want to see coming out of these two. Or we can ask him as well.
I mean, we were with the Minister fairly recently, so he knows our view.
This is on the record here. We don't know what happened behind closed doors.
No, absolutely. It's you know, let's remove the touts. It's as simple as that.
Okay, it's the big problem.
Yeah.
More than dynamic. All right, thanks.
Thank you, Rupa. So finally, before we let you go, I guess what I'm struggling to understand is before the government responded to the Select Committee report from this time last year and before the Live Trust was established, organically the sector had delivered around about 6.5% of tickets with some form of contribution back into the sector, because, you know, artists like Katy Perry and Coldplay had unilaterally decided that they were going to do it. So the government accepted the recommendations of the Select Committee and one of the recommendations of the Select Committee, and have made all the running towards sort of bringing the sector together and towards finding a solution. Live Trust was established, and since then, which is, I guess, beginning of the year really, we're really only up to about 8.5% or 8.3%. So that's just over a percentage growth in just under 6 months. It's not very good, is it? What is it we need to be able to see the further and faster, John, that you talked about?
I think clarity on the mechanism. So again, if we can get any further progress with government on, you know, if we put this pound outside the ticket, it won't attract VAT, or if it does, that money will come back through to us. That's one of the biggest factors. I think the other factor is just, yes, there were those examples of donating to Music Venue Trust, but that was one very important voice in the process, but it was only one part of the process. You know, what we've had to build is something that sits across the whole sector, that is going to have credibility for decades to come. So I appreciate it might not look like we've advanced the number that far, but like I say, we've gone from 500,000 to over 700,000 in the last 2 weeks. It feels like we are building momentum here.
Where would you, if we were to have this conversation again this time next year, which we may, where will we be then?
This time next year we'll be past the million, and I would hope that with a healthy autumn we'll be able to point you towards, you know, being in the multiple of millions.
What would that look like percentage-wise?
You'd need Mark's the guy who tracks those figures.
Yeah. All right, but you think you see that this time next year we will see a significant uptick in the amount of money coming in through the levy?
The momentum is there.
And there's no blockers?
There are always blockers when you're trying to build something new and voluntary, but I don't think there are any insurmountable blockers.
Very good. Thank you all of you for coming in and giving us evidence. We're just going to take a quick break while we bring in our final panel. Finally, we come to what you might call our headliners for today's session. Welcome to Sir Chris Bryant, the Minister for the Creative Industries, Arts and Tourism, and the Minister for Data Protection and Telecoms. My goodness, that's a long job title. And Alistair Jones, the Deputy Director for the Creative Industries at the Department for Culture, Media and Sport. You're both really welcome. Thanks for joining us today. I know you've had a chance to hear a little bit of the evidence so far, and but you certainly heard my last question to John. How happy are you with the £1 donation contributions from arena and stadium shows to date, Minister?
Sorry, say that again. I'm slightly deaf, and this is a really difficult room in which to hear. So if you could bellow, that would be very helpful, Dame Caroline.
I have never been known to bellow in my life, Sir Chris. How happy have you been?
That's not what Tom Cruise told me last night.
Well, what goes between you and Tom is very much for you. How happy have you been with the number of £1 contributions from arena and stadium shows to date?
Well, in the words of Harry Styles, we're pleasing, never perfect. So I'd prefer us to have achieved a lot more by now, but I said in my letter to you in, I think, November last year, that we hoped to make substantial progress by the first quarter of 2025, and we have made substantial progress. That is good. But look, I mean, I want to say to Harry Styles, you know, when you're next thinking of your next tour, please sign up. I know it's not always just up to the artist. It may be a whole series of people who are making the decision, but please sign up. If the Spice Girls could get their act together, which I would love, to start touring again, I think you nodded to that, Dame Caroline, then it'd be great if they signed up as well. I mean, I can give a long list of people, but the worst thing of all is if we were to get to the end of the year and we're still on the kind of numbers that you were talking about earlier, because I think then people would say that the levy was dry. Sorry. Tom McLean or Madonna, depending.
It'll be a very long morning. And at that stage, would you introduce a mandatory levy?
So we've said that we want it to be a voluntary levy because it's quicker to achieve. As you know, anything that has to require statute takes
forever and a day. I don't know when the next King's speech is going to be, so I don't know when we would be able to legislate. I don't think we'd be able to do it by secondary legislation. If I'm honest, my relationship, I mean, John Collins and I spend quite a lot of time together, the feeling in the meetings is there are some things that we still got to overcome. We still got to get the charity all completely up and running, because it's not just about the money coming in, it's about the money going out. But honestly, I have been impressed by how we're getting there. Are there people who could do a bit more? I think Live Nation might want to step up a bit more, but they're a very, very big player in this world. And sometimes I get that it's an individual artist might, for instance, their whole sort of shtick might be that they have a particular kind of charity that they want to support, and this might not be right for them. But I just want everybody who's considering a big tour in the UK coming up in the next year or so to sign up. And then I think we'll have millions of pounds going to a smaller grassroots venue. And I think everybody will pay tribute to you and your committee.
Thank you, Minister. Tom.
Thank you. So the Music Venue Trust say that only 7.5 to 8% of shows announced since the 18th of December have pledged to donate. Do you think 100% is possible in a voluntary system?
Probably not, is the honest truth, because for the reason that I just said, which is that there might be an individual artist from overseas or whatever who might want to say, you know what, I want, if there's a charitable donation coming from me, from my gigs, it's going to go to the Amazon rainforest or whatever it may be, and I would want to honour that. But my guess is, if we could send out a really clear message from this committee to every single artist in the UK or in the US that's going to be filling an arena over the next 5 years, please sign up, because this is about the future of small music venues in the UK, and in the end it's about the future of music, because you don't get big attendances at big gigs unless you've got small venues as well surviving as part of the UK ecosystem.
Thank you. And we heard from arenas earlier, but we should also discuss stadiums. How are you ensuring that they don't fall between the net?
So they're all part of the equation as well. I mean, and of course there's a little bit of kind of interaction, there's a lot of interaction between all the different parts of the ecosystem, and we're talking to them too.
Earlier we heard from the chief exec of the Featured Artists Coalition, who said that we've mainly got a system at the moment of artist-led donations. Do you think it's right that the contributions to date have mainly been driven forward by artists?
Well, it ends up being the whole package in a sense, because anybody just putting together a tour, and there are lots of other things that affect tours, in particular big stadium tours, many of which I've addressed in different arena, but including the issue of whether they can tour in Europe and things like that. But if we can manage to get all of those issues right, then it's the interaction between the artist, their management company, and the stadium itself that ends up delivering the goods or doesn't.
Coming on to ticketing websites, Joff Oddie of Wolf Alice earlier said that the ticketing websites sometimes resist the £1 levy, despite obviously putting fees on top of tickets themselves. And you said earlier that Live Nation could do more. What more?
Well, they could sign up 100% and help in relation to Ticketmaster, but also in relation to any of the acts that they're representing. I don't know whether Alistair wants to add in.
Anything to add to that?
What kind of conversations have you had with them about it?
Well, they've been part of the equation, and I'm having a bit more of the conversation here now with them.
And are there other ticketing websites that you feel are in a similar position?
Well, so the ticketing websites, I mean, obviously that takes us onto the secondary ticket market as well. There's a whole series of questions that I noticed the questions that were asked previously, and we may want to address. And some of the conversations that we're having with them have been slightly more fraught in relation to whether or not we should take legislative action, which I think is our intention.
Thank you.
Okay, Tom, thank you very much. Natasha.
Thank you, Chair. So based on all of your engagement with the sector, including all the time you spent with John, do you think, are you confident that the Live Trust will be a sustainable and well-governed long term?
Yes, so obviously, I mean, it's not easy setting up a new charity. I mean, lots of us have done it as MPs, end up doing it for things in our own constituencies. I have myself. Obviously, you want to make sure that the fiduciary responsibilities of trustees are adhered to. I think what is good is that quite a few people have already signed up as trustees, are people who have been trustees on other things as well, and that means that they know what the job involves. Obviously, we want to make sure that as much of the money that goes in goes out to the right place. But I'm pretty confident that I think they've held interviews for a significant number of people just to complete their roster of trustees, and I'm pretty confident that it will be sustainable. Yeah.
Given your own experience of setting up a charity, any advice for them?
Keep calm and don't get too frustrated with the charity commissioners. They have an important job to do to make sure that everybody understands their responsibilities that they take on as a trustee. But you do have to dot the I's and cross the T's. You can't take shortcuts when it comes to getting all of this right, which is why, I mean, look, as I said earlier, it's not just about the money going into the charity, it's also about the money going out. I'm very hopeful that could happen by the end of this year, but I don't want to, and I've pushed John and others to go as fast as they possibly can, but I don't want them to go so fast that they make mistakes. I think it's a really important part, Alistair.
I would just add, I think the credibility of the trust is really important. The fact that they're working with organisations like the Featured Artists Coalition, MVT, Music Managers Forum, to distribute funding to where it needs to go in the sector, not creating duplication, is, I think, really important to its credibility and to its good functioning in the sector.
Because if it loses any element of credibility, then people are going to start saying, "Well, I'm not going to sign up to this." Then,
just on the sort of the Featured Artists Coalition that the Art Council England set up, and they're distributing those funds into the Live Trust. Is that your preference? Do you have a preference for them necessarily? If a body sets up something similar like that, or to go straight into Live Trust, do you have a preference either way?
I think we might be conflating a few different things, but and that's part of the role of the Live Trust, to make it simple for everyone. So the Arts Council has been advising on this. They've got a lot of experience in grant making, and they've been hugely helpful as part of the group. I know John would echo that. There are things that the Live Trust could apply to. So the government funds the Supporting Grassroots Music Fund. 2.5 million we've committed for this financial year that we're now in. That could be something that could support the Live Trust. The Live Trust will coordinate and distribute to the sector. I think the Arts Council will help on that, but ultimately it's up to the Live Trust.
So, do you think there's any scope, though, to look at things like something similar to the Featured Artists Coalition for, say, festival promoters and those other bodies that we've been discussing throughout this process?
I think festivals are represented as part of that. They're involved with the Live Trust, the Association of Independent Festivals, and John, who runs that, a different John, is very active. And as John Collins said, festivals tattooed on his head as one of the priorities for the Live Trust to distribute that funding. I think they are already involved, and I'm sure they'll be supported.
And in many ways struggling as well.
Yeah. And just finally, do you think that the industry believes you when you make your threat about bringing legislation to make the levy statutory, if necessary?
Well, they better do. And I think, to be honest, we've had such constructive conversations since I took on the role, on the back of our response to your committee report. And, I think a couple of occasions, Dame Caroline has asked me questions in the chamber, and others have, about whether we would implement legislation. And we're very clear that we would if this weren't to be proceeding. But it is proceeding. We've got to where I hope we would get to by now. I'd like us to go a bit faster over the next phase. I'd like more people to sign up. I understand that, obviously, lots of people who are performing now, they came to their arrangements, 18 months ago, 2 years ago, about their tour. But there are lots of people who are thinking about touring now. I guess Taylor Swift is going to be thinking about another tour soon. I hope she'll sign up. You too must be thinking of a tour, and we'll be doing it with or without you.
Thank you very much. Are you just giving a wish list of all the artists that you'd like to see perform in the next couple of years?
I'm already going to Diana Ross.
So you're in the middle of a chain reaction.
I'm also going to the Scissor Sisters, and you'll be shocked to hear I'm going to see Kylie. But I think Kylie Tour was all organised long before this, and I'm sure we should be so lucky, but Kylie might arrange another tour, and when she has another tour, I hope she'll sign up too. Should we stop this now?
I think we probably should. So when you say
stop in the name of love.
So when you say you want to see substantial progress on the levy, I mean, I don't want to keep pushing you on this, but we're currently at we just over 8%, and John said he could see us at a place where that would be pushing towards 1 million by the end of the year. Is that substantial enough for you?
No, I prefer to see more than 1 million by the end of the year. Partly because I want to see more tours happening in the UK, and this isn't the only part of the equation for that. But also because I just want to see more money going into the funds, because some of this is urgent. You know, we can't hang around. I mean, I think there are several areas where I've said that we might choose to legislate. Another area is in the remuneration of musicians and artists. If we have to legislate in that sphere, we will. And of course, we're looking at legislating in relation to the secondary ticket market.
And they said that the money won't reach the venues until 2026. Are you satisfied with the speed of distribution as well?
Well, as I said earlier, I mean, I hope that some money might be going out before the end of the year, but I don't want to hurry them so fast that the trust ends up losing trust, if you see what I mean, because I think that would be counterproductive in the long term. So Festina lente is my Latin tag, which would be hasten slowly.
And so, how would you know when was the right time to step in if things weren't going at the pace you wanted? What would be the alarm bells?
Well, if, for instance, by now I had not seen, if we'd not been able to write to you jointly yesterday to say where we'd got to, I would have been very cross, and I would be saying, right, well, I'm looking at legislation, can we start drafting it? But we've not got there, and I'm very optimistic that this is going to work. I think it's been a good idea. I think there's lots of goodwill behind it in the industry, and I think a lot of artists and their management companies will sign up in fairly short order. But the louder you can make that plea, Dame Caroline, I think the more successful we will be. I need everybody on board. Maybe we ought to have another debate. Maybe you should produce another report which comments on where we've got to and what we need to do next. And you could produce a long list of people who are thinking of touring in the next few years that you would encourage, that you could write to.
Anything to help. Let's move on to Liz, please.
Thank you, Chair. On the issue of business rates, last year government tapered down business rate relief for venues from 75% to 40%. Aren't you concerned that with councils now faced with passing on the relief reduction or offering relief themselves, you've created a postcode lottery for grassroots music venues?
Well, saying that we took it down from 70 to 40 is one way of putting it. Another way of putting it is that there was going to be a complete cliff edge, which was that it was coming to an end, and we were able to say, no, we are coming in with a new rate, and that is protected, and that we're also looking to, and I hope we'll be able to say something in relatively soon, but I don't know precisely when Treasury will do that, or Treasury and MHCLG. We would want to be able to make this more of a permanent arrangement and have a permanent settlement that gives people the security that they need. So obviously, I mean, it's a fair point about postcode lottery, but I don't think that's the problem. I think the problem is, lots of venues are struggling for all sorts of complex reasons. I don't know whether Alistair wants to add to that.
No, sorry.
Treasury didn't change the 110,000 total cap on retail, hospitality and leisure relief. This means that if your gross business rate was £275,000 or above, your relief hasn't changed. But if your gross rate was, for example, £24,000, your relief has almost been cut in half. Why wasn't the £110,000 limit reduced instead of or alongside this reduction in percentage relief so that the burden fell less on grassroots music venues?
Well, again, I make the point that that's one way of explaining what happened. Another version is that everybody was going to be facing 100%, and that's not what they're now facing, because we brought in something which we hope will be more permanent in relation to business rates. Look, the point is well made. I know lots of people who work in hospitality, and not just music venues, but other forms of hospitality, who are concerned about where all of this is going. But they also know that we need to run strong local public services, which need to be funded. So it's a difficult balancing act. Now, you'll be shocked to hear that I'm not going to rewrite the Treasury's rules here on the committee today, but I think the representations have been made strongly on behalf of the whole of the hospitality sector, and Treasury understands that the question is, sometimes people want us to spend more money or pull in less tax, but then they also want us to improve our public services, and all of those things don't happen at the same time.
The reforms next year have been welcomed, but how will they be of any use to businesses that might have been pushed under by the inability to pay higher bills this year?
I don't know what you mean precisely by pushed under. Do you mean a company that's already closed? Well, obviously, what happens in the future isn't going to deal with something that's already closed. I don't know.
I suppose in terms of what we're looking at this year, we've heard that a lot of grassroots music venues are going to close this year. So, So I suppose what we're saying is the reforms are happening too late.
Well, this has been a trajectory over the last few years, obviously, and and certainly if we'd had the cliff edge that was threatened in relation to business rates, I think you would have seen considerably more businesses close. I'm also the tourism minister, and there's a whole series of issues and challenges that face a lot of businesses, including getting the staff that they need, some of the issues about national insurance contributions, the issues around the national minimum wage. As I say, it's a balancing act, and we think we've struck the right balance for the moment, and we'll always look at whether there is more that we can do.
Excellent. So I know you've only had the time to arrive just before this session, but the session we started with, we heard from the Music Venue Trust, who told us that that venues were shutting at 2 a week in 2023. Last year that began to go down to 1 a week, and Mark David said that the committee's report played a part in that because it gave the sector some confidence. Yeah. But he said to us that based upon all the additional cost pressures that the sector are feeling, the reduction in business rate relief, the increase in employers' national insurance contributions, and even things like planning regulation that's coming down the track, which will undermine the agent of change policy, which everyone's very concerned about, which a number of venues up and down the country have been fighting legal battles over. Yeah. He says that already they're seeing that rate of closure going up to 1 a week again for 2025, which is really, really concerning. So around about end of October, November last year, the government responded to our report and accepted the idea of the voluntary levy, but rejected virtually everything else. Is it time to review that, to come back and look again at things like agent of change laws as part of the planning rules, looking at the fan-led review of live music, looking at the VAT, which is significantly higher than any of our competitor nations, to actually come up with something that's a lot more competitive for this sector?
Well, my reading of how we responded to your report is slightly different. So, yes, we disagreed about the fan-led review because I feel I am the fan-led review. I'm a fan, and also parts of the sector had already done their own fan-led review, and which fed into the work that you produced. So that's why we wanted to proceed apace rather than wait for another review. On the voluntary levy, obviously we have taken action. Temporary cut to VAT, as you know, I've already made the point about the difficult financial situation we face, and every time we say cut some amount of money from the taxation that we raise, then there's a question for the expenditure that we have. On the agent of change, we broadly speaking agree with you. There is an issue around whether it should be on a statutory basis or not. I am conscious that there are areas where it would be where the fact that when there's a new development, the fact that there was a music venue next door was not made available to the planning department, and that means, of course, then it doesn't end up being considered, and then you end up with rows after. Now that is something that we need to address. So yes, we're definitely thinking about whether that should be put on a statutory footing. You said the Arts Council should work to reduce the administrative burden applying for public funding. I completely agree. That's why we've got the Arts Council review. It's one of the things that Dame Margaret Hodge is looking at. And then the other thing was about business rates. And we've already taken action for this year, and we're looking at what action we should take for the future. So I think we've been rather more positive about your report than you were thinking that we had been, Dame Caroline.
Could I just add as well? In January, the government announced £2.5 million to the Supporting Grassroots Music Fund for this year. That is a significant commitment. It supports festivals, venues, promoters, rehearsal and recording studios to develop talent, vary their income streams. It's a significant commitment, and we're, of course, beyond this financial year, subject to the spending review, but we're looking very closely at what we can do there.
But you must be concerned, as we are, about the fact that the number of live music venues that's beginning to close. I mean, that they are beginning to close at a more alarming rate than we saw last year. Once again, surely, you must see that action needs to be taken. We need to do more.
I completely, I don't want any small music venues to close, and that's why we're working as fast as we possibly can on the levy. I think in the end that's going to make the single biggest difference. And as I say, we're looking at whether or not the agent of change principle, which we think should be being part of the equation now, should be put on a statutory basis. And just on the broader point about planning, I don't want us to end up in a situation where planning reform makes it more difficult for us to preserve some of the great music venues that we have.
I mean, I suppose our big concern is that it's a bit like what you're dealing with at the moment is a bit like trying to fill the bath with the tap out, in the sense that, Alistair, you spoke about, £2.5 million contribution, but at the same time, the business rate reduction lost £7 million off of the bottom line of music venues. The national insurance contribution will have lost another massive chunk. So these little bits of money, albeit very welcome, are going nowhere near to addressing the kind of gaping hole in finances that's being created by some of the government changes. And then the next thing that we're worried about, Tom, is VAT.
That's right, you were talking a little bit about taxes earlier. How would you gauge the sector's response to the government's refusal to model a temporary cut to VAT, let alone implement one?
Well, most of the people I've spoken to have said, can we have a cut in VAT? And I've said, that's going to be very difficult for us to achieve, and then that's normally the end of the conversation. I'm sure everybody would much prefer us to cut all their taxation, but we end up, the parallel of filling a bath is the same with the public finances. If there's no money coming into the public finances, there's no money to be able to spend on all the other things that we want to be able to do, including, whether that's the NHS or its local public services, or for that matter, it's the funding of the arts and community services by local authorities. So it's a bit of a difficult argument to make.
I guess that's an argument against implementation, but what about modelling it to see what the impact would be?
I don't know. The sector is absolutely able to undertake its own modelling, and I think, if you look at tax reforms that have happened across creative industries and other areas, a lot of that work is often sector-led, and I think in this instance, if the music sector can put together some modelling, we'll of course consider it, but as the Minister says, the bar for changes to VAT is very high indeed.
Would you welcome some modelling from the sector on that?
Yeah, no, very happy to see anything anybody can bring to us, but it's got to be very convincing to be able to say, we're going to radically reform the VAT structure for one particular industry. And my anxiety would be that the theatre industry would make exactly the same argument. that you end up with an awful lot of parts of the creative industries who would make the same argument, and then it's a very big, the bill is big. And as you know, there isn't a lot of money around at the moment in the government coffers.
Is it something you would consider if the levy discussion stalled and you didn't make the significant progress you'd like to see?
I wouldn't link the two, no.
And what discussions have you had with HMRC about the levying of VAT against the Live Trust?
So we've had lots, and Alistair's had a lot of it. So I'm going to hand over to Alistair for that. But the single point I make is, it is unlikely that we would be able to persuade HMRC to change how VAT operates solely for this levy.
The industry has said they would like the levy to be within the price of a ticket. It makes it compulsory from the consumer's point of view. Mm-hmm. Therefore, it is eligible for VAT. That is the rule. It is worth noting, you say a ticket is £60. £10 of that is VAT. So if you've got the levy of that within that, 20p out of the £60 relates to VAT on the levy. So I can certainly understand the sector's frustration, but we absolutely don't believe it should be a blocker on widespread adoption, and the progress that we've made to date shows that it can and should work, and we expect the industry to do that.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. And finally, let's hand over to... Actually, not finally, sorry, because we've got Rupa coming in with a sneaky question at the end. Let's go to Zoe.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Chris and Alistair. So, as Minister, Sir Chris, you have been tasked with coming up with a 10-point plan for music. What would you say a successfully executed plan could deliver in, say, 4 years? What would you want to see?
Well, that's like me telling you what's going to be in my plan. And I'm not publishing it here today, I'm afraid. There's stuff I'm working on still. So the Creative Remuneration Working Group, which was set up under the previous government, I think we're making significant progress. I'd like the record labels to make move closer to the position of the musicians. I'd like to see, for instance, all of the record labels wiping off unrecouped balances in relation to legacy artists who entered into contracts long before streaming came into existence. I'd like to see better remuneration for musicians for songwriters, whether that's from their publishers or from from the record labels. When they're coming in to do work on an individual daily basis. I'd like to see better remuneration for session musicians. I'd like to see us as a nation embrace music more heartily, so that every single child in the country had a chance, not just had a chance to be a musician, but became a musician in whatever way that was available to them. I'd like to see us have a more equitable system for ticketing for the secondary ticket market. I'd like us to stop the ticket touting. I'd like us to see classical music play as important a part in the public discourse as pop music. Have I got to 10 yet?
So you've clearly got a long list, and you've been quite public about the fact that the 10-point plan has expanded.
Yeah.
I think one could potentially suggest that perhaps if it is an ever-expanding plan, is there a risk that it becomes unfocused?
I'm pretty focused on it, if I'm honest, and we've had quite robust conversations in some of the meetings I've been in about trying to make sure that we deliver on all of this. Some of this is not entirely within our gift, so the issue around creative education and music in schools is of course a DFE responsibility, not a DCMS one. And the restructuring of or the review of the Arts Council, I hope will change the way that music is funded as well. No, we're pretty focused. I mean, the slight confusing bit, I think Alistair told me not to say this bit yesterday, is that we're on the verge of publishing our Creative Industries Task Force plan as part of the industrial strategy. I'm not quite sure what date that's going to be published, and that's in discussion with the Department for Business and Trade. But obviously music is a key part of that, So some of the things that we're talking about will be part of that, but some of them won't, and we will want to consider quite what we publish when. But honestly, we're very focused on quite a tight number of things, that they might have separate elements to them.
Thank you.
So, no problem with saying any of that. That's absolutely fine.
All right.
Just in terms of your 4-year timetable, the industrial strategy that the Minister mentions is 10 years to 2035. So that's a particular time frame that we're thinking about a lot of these issues, but with the importance of urgent progress on many of them.
Thank you. And so my final question, we heard in the first panel from, I think it was the Featured Artists Coalition, that they really, really have evidence to back up the fact that touring in Europe is crucial, not just to established artists, but particularly to emerging artists.
Yep.
We've got the summit next week. How far apart are the UK and EU in terms of reaching a deal?
So I would say two things. First of all, I am doing my bit as part of trying to make sure that we get a good outcome in relation to EU touring. I'm not sure quite when that will come and what part of the process it will be, but I was really pleased that the EU informal cultures ministers invited me to their meeting in Warsaw, and I'll be going to the next one in Denmark later on this year. That's the first time that UK culture ministers have been going to these meetings since Brexit, and I think that that's important, and everybody there certainly understands how important we think this issue is. I've also spoken to the EU Commissioner for Youth and Culture, the Maltese Commissioner Miklevs, and I'm working as closely as I possibly can with my counterparts in other countries to get to a good place. Apart from anything else, I mean, I've had several EU culture ministers say to me, you know what, we've got festivals who really want British bands to perform because they're some of the people who sell the tickets. And we can't, because they're saying to us, well, we can only do one country, we can't do touring from one country to another. And the second thing I'd say is, when we secured the deal last week with the United States of America, I think one of the reasons that we were able to do that was that ministers didn't go out all over the place and start saying what should or shouldn't happen, which would then queer the pitch for the negotiators. So I hate to disappoint today, but I don't want to queer the pitch for our team who are in discussions.
Thank you.
Thanks, Sherry. But being able to tour is a really important part of growing the live music sector in the UK and the growth and success of the bands that we create. The Featured Artists Coalition told us a few moments ago that last year was the first year where there hasn't been a UK artist in the top of the single or album or streaming sales, which is really, really worrying. And I think being able to tour, and they explained that being able to tour is a key part of that. So without sort of wishing to kind of preempt what you're going to have in your 10-year plan, have you thought about a UK artist touring fund that would enable artists to be able to cover the costs of being able to look overseas?
So I don't think the big issue is money. I think the big issue is bureaucracy and legal constraints. But so no is the direct answer to your question. But we'll think about it. But to be honest, I mean, there is some money that is provided through the Arts Council to artists who are touring, but I think the specific set of issues are more to do with, frankly, what I thought was a really terrible EU-UK deal that was struck by the previous government.
Right, well, I agree with that, but one of the things that was suggested that might help by a previous panel was the UK Artist Touring Fund, so I'm just putting it out there on your radar. James.
Thank you.
I missed it. All power to you in negotiating with the European Union in the coming weeks and months. I hope very much that we learn of EU touring being a factor in any success you have. Reports recently of your department being disbanded.
Not my department.
Well, it's the department you work in,
right?
In the same way that
it's one of two departments that I work in.
Well, quite. You're greedy.
I might be disbanded. You never know.
Well, hopefully not.
Did you say hopefully?
I said hopefully not.
Oh, right.
As the recording will confirm.
Quite aggressive questioning.
I think not. Care you to comment on the reports of the DCMS being disbanded, and could you see any merit in such a seemingly reckless act?
My general principle about things that I read in newspapers is that some of them might be true and some of them might not be true. And my working assumption is that this is in the latter category, but if I'm honest, I haven't really investigated it very much, and it certainly isn't for me to decide. So this is one of those moments where the minister has to say, that's above my pay grade. But I think there's a value in having a culture department.
Yeah. You've obviously been in the department
with a minister for the arts.
Yeah, good.
With a minister for the arts in it.
Quite a low bar to affirm from. But in terms of your assessment of the department, can you see within the year of your tenure now, is there quite a lot of waste, duplication? We've seen with the health department taking quite stringent, quite strident action on NHS England. Do you see there being equivalences in your department that you would perhaps disband?
We're a very small department. I mean, I think when you do the kind of total budget and you do a pie chart, we normally come in the other category. So there's not much fat, I would say, in DCMS. I mean, I think it's a great department, and I think people work extremely hard to be able to deliver on very tiny budgets extraordinary differences to people's lives. Now, obviously, I have responsibility for particular sectors, museums, galleries, the arts, creative industries, and tourism. But my experience is that the civil servants, don't listen to this, are quite exceptional. I think we will produce a really effective creative industries plan as part of the industrial strategy. I'm really proud of what I've seen where we've got to on that. I think we've managed to solve quite a lot of problems that were on our desk at the beginning of last July, and I think we're going to do some good things.
Oh, question. In your 10-point plan for music, you didn't mention anything on copyright. Would you expect that to be in your 10-point plan, the protection of copyright in the age of AI and anything?
Number one, if the data bill remains as the data bill entered the House of Lords, without any reference to copyright, British copyright law will not have changed at all and will be as robust as it ever was, and the protections for copyright holders as robust as they ever were. You've heard me many times, both in private and in public, on this subject. I want us to be in a situation where the creative industries can be remunerated for their work. It is not for us to give away the labour of other people to third parties for free. I also think that the best kind of AI is going to be AI that is built on premium content, and you can't get premium content without paying for premium content.
What would you say to the Lords and from the result last night of the government's defeat there on that particular issue?
Well, that might be a debate tomorrow afternoon, I'm afraid.
Okay. Minister.
Thanks, James. And bringing out our final rock star for...
Sorry, can I just go back one other point? There's one other point I should... Sorry, Dame Caroline. One other point I should perhaps make, which is that... again, I've said this in the chamber, but I'll say this again here, which is that I don't think for an instant that the creative industries are opposed to technological innovation or innovation of any kind. I mean, historically, they've been the most innovative of the lot. I mean, I think it was Fra Angelico who first came up with how you could put lapis lazuli in a painting and create that particular kind of blue. And that level of innovation still exists today. I don't know many modern artists of whatever kind of discipline who don't use some form of technical assistance innovation today, including artificial intelligence. So that's why I'm so desperate to get to a place where there's a win-win for both the creative industries and for the AI sector in this country. And it's worth bearing in mind, of course, that 40% roughly of the creative industries are tech. And we value them just as much as we do actors and artists and musicians.
Do you think the government fully understand and recognise the enormous economic firepower of our creative industries and the value that they have to our economy above and beyond how they make people feel?
Yes, though how they make people feel is part of the firepower, if you like. But yes, of course. I mean, the number, £124 billion added to the of GVA is repeated by everybody, and quite rightly so. And there'll probably be new numbers as well soon, which will probably be higher, because this is a sector that is growing faster than any other. I've always said that there are some specific challenges in the creative industries around how do you make sure that kids from any kind of background can get into the creative industries and see a future in screen, for instance, rather than just people whose parents were in screen as well. And there are other challenges about how do you make sure that flourishes across the whole of the United Kingdom. But yes, I'm not the only person who thinks this way in government. This is a whole government position, not just my private views.
Rupa.
Thanks. Yeah, in the last year or so, we've seen the demise of the night czars of two major cities, Amy LeMay in London, Sacha Lord in Manchester, and those posts were not replaced. Does that give the suggestion that this stuff is being a bit sidelined, shunted aside, downgraded?
Well, those are obviously decisions for mayors rather than for us, and both of them. But yes, but I mean, I know both of them, obviously, and I think both of them have done an extraordinary job, though some of the media criticise them quite aggressively. No, look, I mean, the nighttime economy is a really important part of what people come to the UK for. One of the great delights as a Welsh MP is about if you want to go to the rugby, for instance, in Cardiff, and you go to the stadium, afterwards everybody spills out into the centre of town, and everything's right there on the doorstep. And so there's a knock-on from great sporting events, or for that matter, great music events. I saw Pink there, was the last band I saw there. And everybody spills out into the whole of the city, and you want that thriving nighttime economy to continue. Sorry.
Two things. One is the enthusiasm from the various combined authorities for the culture and creative industries is extremely high. We announced in January we're going to devolve funding to 6 mayoral authorities, including Greater Manchester. So I certainly wouldn't recognise any loss of enthusiasm. Secondly, over recent weeks we've been working with the hospitality, nightlife, creative industries, including John Collins and Michael Kill of the Nighttime Industries Association, on work looking at licensing. We want to make the licensing regime work well, streamlined, processes effective, and that's obviously a big deal for local authorities as well. So I'm sure there are different ways to skin this particular cat, but there's a huge amount of shared interest at all levels of government, I'm sure.
We touched on the very un-rock and roll subject of planning law. I'm pleased to see that the idea of agent of change, you're not averse to that in the world of build, 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 and this very gung-ho, we are builders, not blockers. I just wondered, could there be an argument for enshrining provision of music venues in local plans?
Well, there could. I mean, I think that's, in a sense, that's what the agent of change principle is seeking to do. And as I said earlier, that's why we're considering the question of whether or not we should put that as a statute, put that into statute. Incidentally, I'm a great fan of Amy LeMay. I remember her when she used to run Ducky at the Royal Vauxhall Tavern.
It does Radio 6,
yeah.
If you wake up
and
early.
I was one of the people who signed up to getting the Royal Vauxhall Tavern listed because I thought that it was an important part of our cultural heritage.
Okay, and very, very last thing. You know my bill already. The 2 consultations, when will the results see the light of day? Because we have got a Friday when it's coming back, which is the 4th of July, but will that be after your results?
I can't give you a precise date, but it will be, I think it's somewhere between soon and imminently.
Okay, so as Diana Ross said, I'm still waiting.
After all these years. Well, and Dame Caroline, as Led Zeppelin sang, when the levy breaks, Mama, you got to move.
Very good. Well, I shall then leave it to you for the final word. Thank you very much, Chris and Minister and Alistair, for joining us today, and actually to all our other witnesses who've. It's been a really long session, and I'm really grateful for everyone's contributions today. Order.